The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you're serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
Listen, it's getting closer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. Okay, welcome back. We are here, episode number 11 of the CoCo Crew. This is, our last episode of our first year. I am John Linville.
And Neil Blanchard.
And we're here with Neil Blanchard, and we are the CoCo Crew. And we hope you're going to enjoy this one last somewhat hurried episode we're trying to tuck in before CoCo Fest. And hopefully you'll see all of you there, and you can tell us whether you liked it or not. What do you think? That sounds like a good idea, right, Neil?
Sounds great. This is the mark of our new year.
That's right. It's like New Year's. It's it's really that. It's a new year for us. Like I said, we started counting from zero, like good C programmers, and this is our 12th episode, calling it number 11. That marks a year since last CoCo Fest. Hopefully, we have inspired a boatload of you to make your way to Lombard, Illinois, to join us for our New Year's celebration known as CoCo Fest. I'm looking forward to it. I know Neil is. He can barely contain himself. He's zipping around, looking to buy every Tim Hortons donut he can find, because that's what the Canadians do. I heard him drinking his Tim Hortons coffee in a mug that when he set it down sounded like somebody had set off a bass drum. So he's probably bouncing around the house there. Are you excited, Neil?
Oh, I'm definitely excited. I'm trying to wrap up this project here, get everything all ready. It's on a crunch time now, for real.
Yeah, well, CoCo Fest is almost here. It's right about, in 2 weeks, Neil and I will be on our way to CoCo Fest, probably stopping somewhere in the Ohio area to visit a barcade. By the time you hear this, it may be even sooner than that. Well, I'm sure it will be, maybe a week or less by the time you hear this. I know it's gotten to be busy around here. I'm applying labels to CoCo cartridges and boxes. Neil, I know you've been kind of busy. Do you want to tell people what you're working on?
I am working on the, what's actually your design, Sega Genesis joypad adapter for the Color Computer 3. So
yeah.
I'm soldering all the components on the boards, soldering DINs, learning how to solder DINs efficiently. That's a task.
Very cool. Yeah, I hope people are going to enjoy those adapters. Like I say, you don't have to use the Sega. You can use the Atari 2600. If you do use one of the Sega adapters with a CoCo 3, you'll get the benefit of the second button. And if you're using a Genesis adapter or a Genesis joypad with the adapter and future software that isn't quite developed yet, hopefully we'll have some games that can make use of the extra buttons on the Genesis pad. So that should be interesting. So you'd have A, B, C, and start there.
How cool would it be to have a game when you can just push start on the controller and it starts automatically?
That would be pretty cool. Almost like Farfall. Oh, wait, that's different. any other projects underway? I don't know. That's probably enough to keep us busy. I have toyed with a few other projects. I'm probably just going to keep those a little bit under wraps for later blog posts and that sort of thing. Mostly it's just packaging up CoCo cartridges and maybe try to collect a few extra odds and ends to take to CoCo Fest for people who aren't as fortunate in their collections as I am. I don't know if I'll manage that or not because it's, like you say, busy. How about eBay or any other acquisitions your way, Neil? Did you get anything this month?
No, eBay. I've been staying off eBay, not for any reason in particular, just because of time.
No time for eBay.
Not this month.
Those poor guys, they're not going to be able to eat. They're not getting enough food, enough cash coming in from from you to help them. I picked up a couple of things, inspired by our infamous printer episode. Actually, I came across, one of the things I said, if I was going to get a printer, it would probably have to be something a little unusual, maybe more like a plotter. Right. And so we came across, I don't know if you've ever seen the FP215, the big flatbed plotter that was available back in the day for the TRS-80s. It's this big, huge beast of a machine, heavy, but it's got like a gantry with the X and Y positioning for a pen. And so that came available, and they come available from time to time. The problem is, of course, you can't get the original pins, but this one, the seller said that he had created an adapter so that you could mount a modern, like, ballpoint or some sort of pen like that in place of the pins that were the original Radio Shack ones. And not only did he include one that's been 3D printed, he also includes the design files. So I haven't quite had a chance to make that work yet, but I'm looking forward to playing with that.
That's cool. So you can still refill it with today's.
That's right. You can still put in new stuff. One other thing that kind of along those lines, I picked up a receipt printer. And this is kind of, you see the printers that are there at your point of sale terminals, when you go and buy something. I don't know if you ever noticed, but a lot of those actually have serial port interfaces on them. And so it occurred to me, they're thermal paper, not unlike the old TP10 printer that was available paired with the MC10, or also worked with the CoCo. And I thought, well, obviously you can still get paper for those. It might make a nice attachment for a CoCo or an MC10, and I found one of those at a decent price and got it in and have played with it a little bit. Doesn't quite work with the CoCo or the MC10 out of the box, but with a little fiddling you can make that work. That's probably going to be a blog post in the future. Don't really have time for it.
You were working on some software, weren't you, for that?
Yeah, so you need to do a poke to get the CoCo or the MC10 into the right serial port speed, because it won't go down as low as what the CoCo expects. And then the printer expects line feeds at the end of the lines, whereas the CoCo sends carriage returns. All of this stuff's pretty easy to fix, but there's a little bit of detail to be had there. So, like I said, I'm going to save that for a blog post, but it's something cool.
I like any type of way you can get a new printer working on a CoCo. It sounds good to me.
Yeah, well, it's kind of cool. It also seemed like, like I say, you can get the paper. I mean, we can't even buy it in small chunks. You buy it in kind of big amounts of the paper because they're designed for, retail stores to fill their receipt printers. But it prints quiet and nice. It's legible, at least until the paper decides to turn black or whatever it's going to do eventually. And it's just a good size, I mean, it's
a small footprint on those things, eh?
It is small, but, it depends on what you want to do with it. For example, one thing we had talked about doing was actually turning it into a little point-of-sale application to use at CoCo Fest, which I don't think I'm going to get to for this year, but maybe next year.
That's awesome.
So I have one more item I'd like to talk about that I got on eBay this year. I posted a picture of this on the Facebook group, or this month, I should say. And I don't think I'd ever really, maybe I'd seen these before, but I wasn't aware of them. This is the TRS-80 Modem Phone 100. And if you are not familiar with this delightful beast of the past, this was actually basically, I think it's designed as a wall mount phone. Maybe it's a desk phone. But so a traditional phone for like the regular plug into the wall telephone system. But it also included a 300 baud modem built into the phone. So the phone's got a DB25 serial port on it, and it can double as a modem, but not just any modem. No, this is not an AT&T phone number kind of modem. This is a dial the phone with your finger, wait till you hear the devil screech, and then you press originate, or you pick up the phone and press answer. So it is a manual connection modem built into a plain old telephone system style of phone. And I couldn't help myself. It's just too awesome.
I think I would have as well. I got to be honest, I've never seen that in my life until you won that auction. That's pretty cool.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Now here's the question: are you going to mount that thing in your kitchen?
Probably not in the kitchen. I might find an excuse to mount it in the office playground, whatever this room is called. But I don't know. We'll see. But like I said, I just could not resist something so delightfully retro.
That's awesome. And it was a good example of it too. I mean, that was complete in the box, was it not?
Oh my God, it was brand new. It was still wrapped in plastic. It still is wrapped in the plastic in the box. You know, they wrap them in individual little bags and tape them shut inside the box. They're still there. I haven't pulled it out. I mean, I'm not a keep it in plastic kind of guy, but so far I haven't. So we'll see. Maybe when I build the new retro wing on the house, that'll be the foundation stone. Well, anyway, thinking about that is probably enough of an introduction on the podcast. So we'll leave you with that thought for just a moment. Maybe hear from our sponsors, and we'll be back with some announcements. Okay, so you ready to move on?
I'm ready. Announcements.
Okay, all right. Now there are the announcements. So we are the CoCo Crew. We are available on Twitter as at CoCo Crew Podcast. You'll see a lot of back and forth between the CoCo Crew Podcast and me for some reason. Although we've started to have a little bit of repartee with the Trash Talk guys on Twitter, so that's kind of fun. Nice to have some allies out there. Anyway, moving on. We do have a Facebook page. So if you look on Facebook for, again, the CoCo Crew Podcast, we have a public group. We get a little bit of back and forth there. Happy to hear people talk about the podcast or about any kind of CoCo related stuff there, including the MC10, the Dragon, any of the Brazilian clones.
It's all welcome.
It's all welcome. Even occasional random retro stuff from other systems, as long as we know which one's the best. We are available through iTunes, although as of the date of this recording, the iTunes feed seems to be an episode behind. I'm not really sure what's causing that. So, honestly, I recommend that you use the feed at cococrew.org directly if you have suitable podcast catching software. But if you are using iTunes, we are available through iTunes, and hopefully that feed will get resolved post-haste. We're also available for streaming through Stitcher. Stitcher does show the latest episode, so I don't think there's anything wrong with the feed. Google Play Music is showing our podcast there. I'm not really sure. I don't use Google Play for downloading podcasts. If anyone does, I'd love to hear your experience with it. But the link for our podcast is there, and that one also is showing through episode 10. So Again, I'm not sure what the problem is with iTunes, but we are listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. This is a collection of technology-oriented, retro-oriented podcasts talking about old arcade games and old game systems from the past and old computers. And I think the newest thing on there is maybe the PlayStation. If you're looking for other technology retro-themed podcasts, that's a good place to go and look. Oh, and I missed that we are on the Throwback Network, which is also a different list of retro-themed podcasts. Those are, while there are plenty of technology-themed podcasts on the Throwback Network, there are also other retro-themed podcasts talking about old TV shows, the 80s in general, Boys R Us. It's a variety of podcasts available on the Throwback Network. So, again, if you're looking for another podcast to fill your spare time when you're not listening to us, feel free to check them out. Finally, of course, as mentioned in the show intro, we are hosted by Cyber Ears. If you are looking for a place to host your own audio, whether it be your own podcast or some other form of audio recordings, then you should check out CyberEar, where you get your audio on your terms. If you do want to reach us for feedback, and I hope you do, you can send us email. Obviously, you can send us feedback through Twitter or Facebook or whatever else, but amongst others, you can send us email to show@cococrew.org, podcast@cococrew.org, or feedback@cococrew.org. All of those addresses will get to both me and Neil. If for some reason you only want to reach one or the other of us, you can reach us. You can reach me as John@cococrew.org. That's JOHN. And you can reach Neil as Neil, Neil, @cococrew.org. Those are our standard announcements. And now at this point, I would like to cover some upcoming events. Recently passed was Vintage Computing Festival Southeast 4.0 in Roswell, Georgia. I was there for part of the first day, just casual driving through. My dad lives in Georgia, so I took my son down and visited Grandpa and spent part of the Saturday in Roswell visiting the old computer guys. Saw our friend Randy Kindig there and a few other folks. They have a nice little museum down there with a bunch of Apple stuff and some other retro computing themed items now. Lots of interesting pieces of old technology, including Apple I's and S100 base machines. And
Was there an original Apple One there?
oh yeah, there actually were two, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
But, they have Apple I's and other Apples. They had a Pippin if you're in gaming. They had an S100, like an MC S100 machine. They had, like I said, a lot of old examples of old hardware there. Well, they had Roy Justice's Mark 8 replica. I'm pretty sure it was his, the one that he built. Have you ever met Roy Justice, Neil?
No, I've always wanted to, and I think when I first started going to the fest, that's the year he stopped going.
Yeah, he stopped. He had some family illness that he needed to be available at home, and he hasn't come back. I hope he'll make it back one day. He doesn't live that far from me, but far enough that I can't just drop in on him. So anyway.
And Roy was the guy behind the first VGA adapter for the CoCo 3.
That's right. And I think it's still not a bad one, although, it does lack some of the extra fancy stuff like the raster emulation or whatever with the black bars, the scan lines or whatever. Moving on from there, by the time you hear this, the boys in Brazil will have had their equivalent to CoCo Fest. Hopefully that will have had a good time down there the weekend of April 9th and 10th. Probably about the time you hear this, if you're anywhere in the Northeast near Wall, New Jersey, you may still be able to make it out to the Vintage Computer Festival East 11. That's XI. They used to use Arabic numerals. Now they've switched to Roman numerals. Not sure why, but that's what they did. That's on April 15th through 17th. That's Friday through Sunday. Their event's a little interesting. On the Fridays, they have in-depth kind of technical-oriented classes on a variety of topics, some of which are electronics, some of which are, how to apply RetroBrite to make your cases look clean or that sort of thing. I don't know exactly what they're doing this year, but should be a good show. Of course, on the weekends, they concentrate on a combination of some sort of broader interest, historical talks, and of course a show floor where you can see some of the old computers in action. So anyway, if you're in the northeast part of the United States, you may want to make it out there to Wall, New Jersey, April 15th through 17th. Of course, the big event, hopefully you're not tired of hearing us talk about CoCo Fest, because if you're tired of it, we have failed. But our big event for our year, the 25th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest, coming up April 23rd and 24th. Of 2016 in Lombard, Illinois. I don't know what else to say that hasn't been said. This is our big event. This is our big gathering for CoCo folks. I really hope if you've been listening to the podcast at all, you know what I'm talking about, and I really hope you've already made plans, and maybe by the time you hear this, you'll already be on your way. What do you think, Neil? Exciting stuff?
It's definitely exciting, and just when you think it's great, it just keeps getting even better, and you hear all these people that are showing up at this one. I think the 25th anniversary has something to do with it as well.
I think the 25th anniversary has some people wanting to come. I think there's a couple of guys that have been out beating the bushes for the past year, trying to get everybody who might be interested to come out. I'm not sure who those guys are, but I'm sure glad they're out there beating the bushes for the event. I'm hoping it's going to be a lot of people there. I hope we're going to blow the doors off the place. If nothing else, hopefully we'll have a couple of new people and some old timers who haven't been coming for a while. That would be good enough for me. But I don't want to downplay it here at the end. I hope we get through. Like I say, I hope we have 150 people. But we'll see. Maybe it'll only be 60. But anyway, show up one way or another. Don't make us come out and get you.
Yeah, it's not too late if you haven't booked a room.
That's right. Okay, so I've got a new one I want to announce here. I've never been to this event, and I don't know it's 100% overlap on the kind of person that would normally listen to this podcast, but I suspect there'll be some. This event is called the Southern Fried Game Room Expo, and it is scheduled for June 10th through 12th in Atlanta, Georgia. And this event has they're going to have a collection of old arcade games, game consoles. Looks like they include tabletop gaming. There'll be speakers. It looks like a cool event.
It does. You posted the link a few times, and I've checked it out. It's definitely up my alley.
Yeah, so I think I'm probably going to try to go to this one. I haven't made firm plans yet, but it looks like a cool event. There is going to be, obviously, a link in the show notes. I hope if that sounds like something that might be interesting to you, especially if you're in the southeastern part of the United States, in or around Atlanta, then I hope you will check it out. Okay, here's an event that I think will be interesting to some of our listeners. It's tempting to be hostile to this event since, they're using the wrong computer. But I think we're well past that kind of rivalry these days. It is a cool event. I went to the event, I guess it was last year I went, right? Yeah. This is called Kansas Fest. Kansas Fest is an Apple II-oriented event held at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri, and it is essentially a summer camp for Apple II enthusiasts. It runs from July 19th through the 24th, so that's something like a Tuesday through a Sunday, something like that, and it will have a lot of, it starts off with a big Apple giveaway, which typically includes not just Apple computers, but other various detritus of other retro computers and such. But then it goes on from there with a number of talks, very good talks last year, some more technical than others, kind of a broad range, so very enjoyable for a lot of people. An opportunity to spend a lot of time with some like-minded folks They're pretty friendly. Obviously they'll review a bit about liking the different computers. So hopefully no worse than what I've done to them here. Anyway, it's a good event. I recommend it if the idea of going and spending several days at a summer camp with a bunch of old geeks sounds like fun to you, then I think you'll enjoy it. What do you think, Neil?
I'd be tempted to go. I remember last year I wanted to go, but I was in Vegas at the exact same time of the event.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to make it this year, but I would like to think that I will make it back at some point, maybe next year. Like I said, it's a pretty cool event, a lot of cool technical talks, a lot of cool retro computing talks. There's sometimes some interesting retro personalities shows up. They've had Steve Wozniak has shown up there in the past.
That's cool.
John Romero has showed up there in the past.
Wow.
That's one of the guys behind the Doom game from back in the 90s. He was also an Apple II programmer before that. Anyway, pretty cool event. It's the kind of thing that might appeal to you. You probably better sign up because they do fill up. They actually stay in the dorms there at Rockhurst University. They eat meals in the student cafeteria. It's like I say, it's like going to summer camp. Cool stuff.
Or going back to college, university.
Yeah. Okay, our last event that we're going to talk about this time is the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest, number 11. That is scheduled for September 10th and 11th in 2016 in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. This is another VCF event. It's lots of a variety of old computers will be there. I think this event tends to have a higher concentration of Commodore stuff, but it's a good group of guys. And the most of the people that are involved in the event, a lot of them show up for CoCo Fest because it's a nearby location, and it's a good bunch of guys. And I think Neil went to this event last year.
I did,
and you enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was excellent, and they're also doing the auction style, just like CoCo Fest now. They did that first time last year.
So they picked up the idea. I think they will admit that they got the idea from CoCo Fest on doing the auctions.
That's right.
Which is one of the best parts of going to CoCo Fest is the no minimum bid auction. And so it's another opportunity in the Midwest for some retro computing goodness. And I recommend, if you're interested in such things, that you take advantage of it. All right. Well, that probably covers our announcements and new events. We're going to take another little break here and be back with some news.
This commercial's going out to you, Boise.
CoCo 2, c'est le coq champignon, des micros et dans le pion. Pour le jeu, il est pas battable, les études, c'est pas bizarre. L'expansion, il a ça, les commandes, tu vas voir ça. Notre CoCo est programmable, pour tes cours, c'est bien serviable. CoCo 2 de Radio Shack, ton affaire est dans le sac.
Un ordinateur couleur qui a de la personnalité. Le CoCo 2 de Radio Shack. On solde pour Noël à partir de 149,95.
CoCo 2 de Radio Shack, ton affaire est dans le sac, c'est toi et CoCo 2.
And now we're back with some news. So, Neil, once again, we have what I consider to be an almost ridiculously long news segment. Are you amazed that there's always so much news to talk about on this old machine?
There's a lot of news. And I mean, this is actually less than a month.
Yeah, it is. It's 3 weeks or something this time, since we're trying to fit in another episode.
But I like it, though. It's nice to see that this machine is still going.
It is cool that there's so much stuff. Like I say, I don't know how much of it is you find what you go looking for. How much of it is that providing a bit of an outlet. People are a little more open about telling what's going on, what projects they're doing, that sort of thing. I don't know. One way or another, though, projects always seem to heat up a little bit before CoCo Fest. Maybe that's why there's more news. It's good to have one way or another, that's for sure. All right. Well, let's move on to the first one. The first one actually comes from me. Had this TP10 printer that has kind of been laying around for a while, and then since I had been playing with the MC10 computer a bit, which is sort of associated with the TP10, although the TP10 works well with the CoCo too. But people tend to pair them in mind. I think they were sort of designed to go together, certainly in similar form factor. Anyway, playing with the MC10 got me thinking about the TP10. And so I decided to kind of give it a try and play around with it. And I did have a roll of paper, and so that was okay. But I remembered that people have discussed it as they've had some difficulties finding paper for the TP10. And so I decided to kind of take a look, see what I could find, because I didn't really want to have to go out and buy rolls of fax paper and then cut them in half with a bandsaw. So I got to looking around, and turns out that there is there was this printer, the A6 pocket printer is what it's called. That I don't know if you probably still can buy them, although they're probably old stock at this point. I don't think they're still in production. I could be wrong. But there was a printer that uses the same width of paper. I think the rolls may be smaller overall, but it's the same width and therefore will feed into the TP10. And you can buy this paper off the shelf at Amazon right now. And so I thought, well, I got to check this out. I guess it's Cypix is the brand name there. Anyway, there'll be a link in the show notes. You can see my picture. It's got a picture of the box. You go looking for stuff on Amazon, you can find this paper, and you can buy brand new paper that'll fit your TP10, nice and white paper, so you don't have the yellowed old stock TP10 stuff. Just is not your only option, and you don't have to cut fax paper rolls in half anymore. You can just buy this brand new paper. So I thought that was pretty cool. Posted a picture of it on the Facebook group, and include the news here. So, do you have a TP10, Neil?
No, but I'm eyeing one up, actually. There's this one on eBay I've been looking at.
Yeah.
I think I might make a move on it, especially now.
Yeah, well, now you know you can get paper for it. The great thing about the TP10, which is it shares in common with that receipt printer I was talking about before, is since it's a thermal paper or a thermal printer, you don't have to worry about finding ink or ribbons for it. No ink, no ribbons, no toner, just the thermal paper. Very cool stuff. All right, well, moving on. So often the Dragon 3264 Facebook group started catching wind of this new project that's out there, coming from, it's a guy named, and I know I'm going to mess up this name, but Baz Gialopsis or Gialopsis. I suspect that is, I'm not even sure, maybe a Greek name. I know I don't know the right way to pronounce it. So Baz, if you're listening, feel free to send us an email and maybe give me a hint as how I should be pronouncing it. Or, you could even send an audio feedback to us. That would be most welcome. Anyway, he's doing his hobbies under he's doing this work under what he calls beta gamma computing. Seems to have a variety of retro computing projects under that moniker. But this in particular is about the Draco 64. And so, as we've mentioned here, the Dragon computer was very similar to the Tandy Color computer. The biggest difference being the wiring of the keyboard, and then the Dragon had a different serial port and a different parallel port, or has a parallel port, whereas the CoCo has the Bitbanger serial port, that sort of thing. But they're very similar machines. And so Baz has figured out a way to, I guess he's adding a little circuitry to, I guess it's to the Dragons. Yeah, he said he has to convert a Dragon to it, but basically he's converting a Dragon to a CoCo in a way that's switchable, so that you can still boot up as a Dragon, or you can flip a switch and boot up as a CoCo, all in one box. And then he's even created a new badge, so it's got the Dragon logo and then Draco 64, then with a Tandy Color computer logo on it. I mean, it looks great. It looks professional. It looks like it just rolled off the line somewhere. I would like one. Sounds like we don't have the logistics in place to get them here in the United States. not quite so committed as to figure out how to get a Dragon 32 over to him wherever he's at. But it looks really cool. If you're in Europe or otherwise in a position to send Baz your Dragon, I highly recommend it. It looks like a cool project. Did you take a look at this, Neil?
No, I haven't. Actually, I'm going to definitely take a look at it, though. It looks pretty cool.
Very cool stuff. Baz, good work. And I hope a lot of people beat a path to your door. All right, so obviously we've mentioned Steve Strobridge, or the original gamer Stevie Stro, on this podcast a few times. I know he does us the favor of mentioning us on his broadcast related to the CoCo. Anyway, he has taken to doing some live marathon sessions on the weekends, mostly, I guess. And he'll let people know that he's going to do them, and then people will join in with him via Skype or through the you can watch through the streaming services available through YouTube. And he'll just play a bunch of games, and the people that call in will make suggestions, or they'll say, well, these games have this in common, or have you looked at all the games that use semi-graphics mode or something like that. And so he's got a few of these up. I participated in one. Looks like Curtis Boyle's been participating in a lot of them, and Nick Morentis as well. So if that's the kind of watching some old guys play CoCo games sounds like a fun afternoon on a Saturday for you, I definitely think you should check it out.
That's great Steve's doing these videos as well, because it shows people different games on the CoCo.
Yeah.
Might not have been aware of it. They might not even know what a CoCo is, and they might bring people into the community.
Definitely. So the next news items is a posting on Facebook from Jason Lee Steer. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that quite right, but Jason, I take it, is in the UK. Sometimes, we're divided by a common language. So hopefully I'm pronouncing at least his first name correctly. Anyway, he has posted some signal traces from an oscilloscope where he's looking to capture some composite video output on a PAL CoCo 2. He's trying to consult with Ed Snyder on some of that. There's not a lot of news here, but I thought it was kind of neat that they were working together and showing some signals and discussing that. And, you know what? He's not English, he's Australian. So, there you go. Sorry about that, Jason. I do know there's a difference. I just didn't know that was what the difference was. It's all in the Commonwealth. What do you know? Like I said, not a lot of news here. It's just kind of cool that people are working together, looking to solve some video issues on PAL machines. If that's the kind of thing that sounds interesting to you, you may want to check out the link in the show notes and see what's going on. I will say that the PAL video conversion circuit is in the CoCo is kind of neat because you're still using the 6847 video display generator, which is fundamentally an NTSC video chip. So you have to have a circuit that is timed correctly to essentially stop the 6847, to stop time for the 6847 for a certain number for a certain length of time, and generates signals as if it was still generating lines. And then when you get to the right point, you then, let the 6847 run again, which is crazy, right? You would never do that these days. I think you would insist on having the proper style of a chip. Of course, now the video is all done differently anyway, but anyway, it's a pretty neat topic. So if it sounds interesting to you, go check it out.
And that board, that's a separate board altogether, right?
No, I think it's actually, looking at the pictures, I think it's actually on the CoCo motherboard. They just have a different version of the motherboard.
Oh, see, I always thought the PAL CoCos had a separate board underneath, or maybe that's the Color Computer 3.
Yeah, I think the PAL CoCo 3 has a separate board. Not 100% sure, but I think that one actually is more like what you're thinking. But the PAL motherboards that I've seen seem to be different motherboards, even though they kind of number them the same as the NTSC motherboards. So I don't know how they kept them straight. But so moving on. So there's a link here. Actually, it's a mailing list thread that was about IDE interfaces for the CoCo. Which was, in this case, I don't think was the most interesting part of the discussion. But so the discussion kind of actually referenced something that had been in a Facebook posting, and the discussion was about whether or not you need gold-plated connectors when you're interfacing with the CoCo. And of course, there's the default. The default correct, pre-approved answer is yes, of course you need gold connectors because they're the best, right? So nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Nobody ever got fired for putting gold on your PCB card edge connectors, right? But, not everyone put it on there because it does cost extra if you're building the connectors. If you're building the PCBs, it costs extra to put the gold plating on, and it's not clear to everyone, including me, that it's a necessary expense. When even if you do get some buildup, or you can usually just clear it off with an eraser or a little alcohol or whatever, right? So fine. Well, but then the suggestion was that back in the day, that Tandy had been sort of warned off from using a gold-plated edge connector on the CoCo because you could actually get corrosion between. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. The connector on the CoCo is not gold-plated, but so if you use gold-plated PCBs, you could theoretically get corrosion because when you put unlike metals together with the I'm not much of a chemist here, but when you put unlike metals together in contact with a dielectric, which could be the air, you can get corrosion, and so you could actually theoretically, you could damage the connector on the CoCo by plugging in gold-plated connectors. Now that generated a lot of harumphs, and
that was quite the discussion. It was pretty interesting.
It was an interesting discussion. I know I dug out a couple of papers that I found on the topic that weren't too deep. They were deep enough to lose me somewhat on the chemistry, but they weren't, unfathomable. I think still the overall consensus was that gold connectors were good. And like I say, I don't think it really changed any minds about how necessary it is. But either you still think they're good and necessary, or you think they're good but not necessary. But there is some evidence in some situations that you will get a certain amount of corrosion, just as chemistry predicts, right? It's just a matter of how much is too much, and how much of it is naturally wiped off by the friction of inserting a cartridge into a card edge connector. Anyway, if you weren't part of the discussion, maybe you'd be interested. You could go check it out, see what highbrow intellectual discussions happen on the CoCo mailing list.
Definitely an interesting read. And also to add in here real quick is, out of all the Tandy disk controllers, only one of them used gold-plated connectors, and that was the Tandy FD501.
I didn't realize that.
Even the last one, the 502, went back to tin.
Well, that's cool. Or interesting, or whatever. Or maybe it sucks.
I don't know what made them change at the last revision. It's hard to say. I mean, maybe that could be a factor, or maybe price, or who knows.
Yeah, well, like I say, it makes you wonder. I mean, so like a floppy controller, you expect to be plugged in a lot. You're not normally going to unplug that at the end of the day. You're going to leave it plugged in. So if you're going to have any corrosion, a connector that's going to stay plugged in longer is going to tend to have more of it, right?
That's right.
I think that makes sense. So I don't know, maybe that was influenced, or maybe that was part of the thinking for why they moved away from the gold. I don't know if they had any actual empirical evidence of that, or if they just were convinced by someone else to do it that way, or what. I don't know. Or maybe they just wanted to save 10 cents on a connector. Okay, well, moving on. Another link that's not entirely a news item, but a posting from Paul Thayer to the Color Computer Facebook group. It says, any CoCo 3 basic programmers out there dealing with graphics, do you suffer from an immense amount of hdraw, hbuff, and hkick commands that take up valuable programming space? Run out of memory space for your graphics? I have solutions for you. Contact me if you're interested. Yeah, so I think I don't know if the contact me part was overly well received. A couple of people seemed to raise an eyebrow at that, but I think the discussion that ensued kind of was suggested that maybe Paul should to blog about whatever it is he's talking about there. He posted what looks like a logo for a blog, but I don't think he ever got to the blog posting. So, Paul, if you're out there, I'd love to see your blog posting. Let's see what you're doing with the super extended color basic, and what kind of tips and tricks you have for expanding the power of the basic graphics commands. I'd love to hear about it.
I could think of one person that'd be interested in checking that out or finding out what that is.
Who's that?
Jim Jerry.
Oh, yeah. Jim probably would be.
He's the basic programmer guy.
Yeah. Although, I don't know. Does he deal with any basic that's not going to run on the MC10? I'm not sure. I don't know. Jim, let us know. Okay, so I think in the last episode, we had mentioned that Travis Pop was interested in creating an ultimate image for the CoCo STC. So I've included, he did announce that he had done so. He's got his take on the Ultimate STC image. Again, this is what is Ultimate is somewhat in the eye of the beholder. So you may or may not agree, but it's out there and you can check it out. The link is in the show notes. Okay, this link is one that's not going to appeal to everyone, but I thought it was interesting, partly because it's from my friend from the Linux community, Alan Cox. Alan's been working on a retro project that spans a number of retro computers. He's working on a Unix-like kernel for basically for retro computers called, well, I'm not sure. The proper pronunciation seems to still remain a bit of a mystery. It could be called Fusix, Fuzzix, or Fusix. Maybe there's some other permutations on that, but I tend to say Fusix because that's what looks normal to me. But I think Brett Gordon says Fusix, and since he does a lot more work on it, maybe he has more right to an opinion. I tried to get Alan to tell me what he calls it, and he just said, yeah, it could be any of those. Anyway, so his announcement comes on Google+, and he says, BCPL is now compiling itself on Fusix using IntCode. The IntCode interpreter is from Robert Nordier's V7 x86 with various type and sign fixes to make it work 16-bit. Blah, 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 right? So why is this interesting? Okay, well, BCPL, I'm not even sure what BCPL stands for, but this is an early programming language that is one of the direct predecessors of the C programming language. And, of course, C is a very prominent, prolific, and important programming language for systems programming, and at one time was more important for applications programming, although I'm not going to say that day has passed, but it's probably not as important for applicating. So a number of people would have some historical interest in playing with BCPL. And so if that includes you and you're a CoCo user and you haven't been following Fusix, maybe you should pick your head up and take a look and get involved with Fusix, and maybe you can play along with some BCPL. How about you, Neil? You're going to program in BCPL?
Well, I got to figure out Fusix first.
All right. Yeah. So moving on, the next link comes from the CoCo mailing list from Tim Lindner, but it's a link to an eBay auction that is not Tim. So it's the auction is for, it's quote, a rare New York Times company Radio Shack TRS-80 Color Computer 2 process controller. And so the CoCo itself, sort of unremarkable. The CoCo 2, I'm not sure the exact model number, but it does appear to have extended basic. The only thing that's interesting is there's a property tag on it for the New York Times Company. Has a space for an equipment number. It's got the tag, but it doesn't actually have a number emblazoned on the tag. So I don't know if that was a mistake or what. But the interesting part is it comes with a card, and it's it plugs into the expansion port. Has a number of opto isolators, which are signaling components designed to turn on to be switching components, basically, that provide a certain amount of electrical isolation between the two sides of the circuits. And so basically, this is some kind of card designed to turn other machines on and off, basically, with a certain amount of electrical isolation to protect the CoCo from whatever might happen at the other end of that circuit. But there's no actual indication as to what that was. There is a ribbon cable coming off the side of it. I have no idea what you can do with this, but the rest of the circuit doesn't look very complicated. 74 series logic, and I'm guessing there's maybe a resistor pack there in the light blue, but it's kind of a neat card. It's got its own little custom case. The problem is the auction was priced. The initial opening bid price is $199.95. That's US dollars. I don't know about shipping elsewhere. It's in Texas. I'm in North Carolina. Shipping to me was $39.95, which sounds a bit high. So
that's a little high.
And so I've seen this auction run through twice, and still nobody's even bid on it. So I don't know what's going to happen with it.
I thought maybe you'd want that controller.
I would like to have it, but not for $250.
No.
I hope somebody gets it eventually. I hate to see them when they're, they don't seem to be sold by a CoCo person. They're priced a bit too high. There's always that concern that somebody else who thought they were going to get rich off of an old computer will suddenly say, well, hell, nobody wants this. I'm just going to throw it in the trash. And I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that they don't throw it away. I hope eventually they come to their senses and put it out. Well, hopefully they'll put it out for, essentially no minimum bid or $1 or whatever the minimum to start is, and then let the eBay folks set the price. Not eBay, but let the bidders set the price.
I agree.
Which, I don't know why more people don't do that, because I see plenty of auctions that start at 99 cents and sell for $400 or whatever. I mean, the price, you're not going to change the end price very much by setting the beginning price way high. You're just not going to sell your thing. It's so
true.
I don't know why so many sellers make that mistake.
But, yeah, I have actually, I think it's the other way around. I think you can make more money putting something up at $1.
Yeah, well,
it creates a buzz, right?
Yeah, well, I've sold. I don't sell a lot on eBay. I have sold a few things that were truly rare, because I'm fortunate enough to have been doing this long enough to pick up a few things that were truly rare. Everything that I've sold, I normally price at 99 cents. For the ones that are truly rare, and I've had things sell, price them at 99 cents opening, and then have them sell for over $400 or whatever. It doesn't limit your output price. Occasionally, if it's not going to sell, it's not going to sell. So, I mean, if you just can't let it go for $1, then don't put it up there. But because somebody might come along. But if you're just hoping to get rich because you found an old computer and, people pay a lot of money for those, I don't think it's a good strategy. Moving on, John Mark Mobley announced Volume 35, Number 4, Winter 2015 edition of the Glenside Color Computer Club newsletter. This was the Glenside folks put out this newsletters 4 times a year, I guess. I think they're quarterly. And there's a lot of promotion of the CoCo Fest here, a lot of pictures of last year's CoCo Fest. I see Neil, I see me. I see a lot of other folks.
Farfall. That's in the
I see some Farfall. I see John Mark Mobley and Kip Kuhn trying to hold up the Fairfield Inn and Suite sign.
That was funny.
So yeah, lots of cool stuff. Of course, announcing the coming CoCo Fest. I thought it was cool too. They've put in here some links to some other things to do in the Chicago area. I don't know why they haven't done that in the past, but I thought this was a great idea. Links to planetarium downtown, the Field Museum of Natural History, which is an amazing museum if you like history museums, of course. But there's lots of cool stuff there. Obviously, there's the big T-Rex skeleton in the main hall, but lots of cool exhibits there. They have a good Egyptian exhibit. I think is a part of their permanent display. But yeah, lots of cool stuff there. Medieval times, the Navy Pier, Six Flags, whatever. And then along with that, they also have a list of nearby restaurants, restaurants near the CoCo Fest location, which I think is pretty helpful because you're kind of just out on the strip on Lombard without a lot of other stuff around. So if you're not a natural explorer, it's a little bit hard to find places to eat. So it's good to know where there's some stuff. So good job on the CoCo Fest newsletter, guys. I think that was a nice addition. Well, they also sent that information out to the mailing list. Anyway, so there it is. Cool stuff. Did you get your newsletter, Neil?
I did. I enjoy that read.
Yeah.
I like when they publish them.
Very cool stuff.
I'd like to check out some of the sites around CoCo Fest, but I got to be honest, I don't want to miss any minute of the actual fest.
Yeah, well, it is only 2 days. You could stay an extra day or two if you want to.
Yeah, that would be the way to do it.
Although I'm not going to be able to do that with you this year, but
yeah, we got the bar queue.
Yeah, that's true. That's our extra day would be on the way out there.
That's right.
Okay, moving on. So Rogelio Pereira is a member of the community for a long time, posted the mailing list where he was trying to repair a CTR 82 cassette player. I happen to know a little bit about this myself because I just did a very similar thing. So these, like so many devices, I don't know if that's limited to the time or I don't know, maybe they still make them with belts in them, but these cassette players have belts in them made out of rubber that wear out and or just dry up and become brittle, and they break. And I had one that had done that. It's got 3 belts on the inside. 2 of mine had broken. I think Rogelio, maybe all 3 of his had broken, but he went out and did some measurements and found some replacements and posted about, what you need, what kind of belts for the sizes of them, whatever. Sounds like he had pretty good success. I took a slightly different approach. You can actually get miscellaneous, sort of like a grab bag of rubber belts from some sellers off of eBay. So I ordered some of those, waited for them to come in, and just sort of mixed and matched until I found a few that fit mine. Seems to work. I was able to load code off of cassette tapes into my MC10 with it. Either way, still you achieve the same result. You get a working tape player. So keep the old machines running. It's got to be good stuff.
And I have to thank you guys actually for putting those posts up, your post and his, because I actually was able to repair a really expensive set of studio Denon CD players for a radio station in town here.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the same problem. The trays went open, and sure enough, it was just the belts. The belts were just dry right out.
Very cool stuff. All right, well, moving on. There's been some extra news since this initial link, but I'm going to start. You just keep this one since that's what I had first. But so this comes from Victor Trucco. It's part of our Brazilian compatriots working with the CP400. CP400 is essentially, for most intents and purposes, it's a CoCo 2, but the slot is a little bit smaller. It doesn't quite fit the normal CoCo cartridge, but electrically it's the same. So, for example, if you take the PCB out of the CoCo cartridge and shove it in the slot, the games will still play, but the cartridge itself, the plastic or whatever, is sort of a different shape and size. A little unfortunate. But for anyway, I guess the CP400 never had the equivalent of a multi-pack. But if you're, if you have a CP400 and you know that it runs the same software as a CoCo 2, then it ought to be fairly obvious that if you had a multi-pack, you could use one of those as well, right? And so I guess the Brazilian guys decided they were going to have one. And so he's designed a multi-pack replacement. And it's looks like it's basically two motherboards. There's one that actually has the 4 slots. Maybe it's 5. No, yeah, 4 slots. And then he's got a kind of a daughter board that I think that plugs into the CP400, or it could be a CoCo, or even a Dragon, I guess, and has a little, like a ribbon cable that connects it to the other board. But it's like I say, it's a multi-pack replacement. And so if you're keeping up with the CoCo hobby and watching eBay, you'll see that multi-packs have become little buckets of gold where people are pretty desperate to buy them on eBay. I'm not really sure the multi-pack ought to merit that amount of of expense or attention, but
I know, and the rarity of them, you don't see them show up as often as you used to.
Yeah, so I guess that's it. Is just they're just kind of rare, and if you haven't had one, or if you do have a real need for one, then what else are you going to have, right? But I guess that's what's driving the price. But anyway, we might refer back to this a little bit later in the podcast, but we have at least one solution on the way coming out of Brazil. We may have to set up some sort of import-export company to send Farfall cartridges and joystick adapters to Brazil in exchange for multi-pack. Seems like they've had some other cool stuff from time to time that I might like to get out of Brazil. So we may need to set that up with Daniel Campos or somebody else.
And apparently they're going to be demoing this at their fest this weekend.
Yeah. So one more reason why I wish I could go to Rio. Anyway, well, moving on. Let's see. This is another post from Tim Lindner. That's the mailing list. So I guess he noticed. Let's see. He was playing Wildcatting, which is an old CoCo game, and he's playing it on a CoCo 3 using the RGB to VGA video adapter, and says he was getting the wrong colors. I guess we figured out that he needed to boot up with the MPI set to a different slot and then execute a palette command and then switch the MPI over to the program pack or whatever. So he's got the command sequence documented here. It's, like I say, it's not real in-depth technical stuff. It's more like once you realize what you need to do, it's sort of obvious. It's the whole realizing what the real problem is always the problem. I'm sure we've all been there, right? It's like whatever you're working on, once you figure out what the problem is, it's, turn this screw half a turn to the right, or just solder this wire there, or, in my line of work, it's always, every fix comes down to one line of code. It's just knowing which line to change. So it's kind of like that. Anyway, it's kind of a neat little solution to a problem that especially people new to the community might not be familiar with the different usage of the palettes on CoCo 3, or especially people that have never had an RGB output on a CoCo 3. May want to check into that. CoCo 3, I think by default, at least the NTSC CoCo 3, I think comes up in composite palette mode by default. Okay, so here's another one. Not a lot of news here, but I thought it was kind of neat. On Facebook, we have Rick Adams, who was a software developer for the CoCo back in the day. He did a couple of games, including Temple of Rom. And he posted a picture that he says, someone disassembled one of my old games, presumably Temple of Rom, and extracted out the map. And then so he's got a picture of the map, and it's kind of cool. It's unfortunately it's dark blue on black, so it doesn't necessarily show up very well. But it gives you kind of the whole layout of the game. Might be interesting to you, particularly if you're a fan of Temple of Rom. You like Temple of Rom, Neil?
Yeah, it's a good game. And it's cool to see that someone took the time to do that.
Yeah, I'd like to get more information on that, but unfortunately I don't know who did it, or how much difficulty was involved in it. So if you are the person who did that Temple of Rom map and sent it to Rick Adams, or if you're Rick Adams and you want to tell us something about the person who did that, We would love to hear from you either way, whether it's email or an audio submission or, whatever.
Definitely. I'd be interested.
So send that to feedback@cococrew.org, and we would love to hear from you. Okay, stepping to the next item. Toolshed beta release. This is from Tormod Volden. Tormod has been around the community a while and does a lot of work with Nitrous 9. I guess he's doing a lot of work with Toolshed as well. Toolshed, of course, is a set of utilities that help you deal with CoCo disk images, both for OS 9 and Extended Color Basic. There's also tools in there for dealing with cassette images and a few others. There's some tools. I think there's a tool in there for rebuilding Sierra games on the CoCo and some other stuff too. Anyway, there's been some changes that have accumulated over some amount of time since the last release, which was Toolshed 2.1. So I guess he's moving towards a Toolshed 2.2 release, and wanted people to be aware. If you have any bugs existing in what is on its way to be Toolshed 2.2, you may want to go ahead and report them, see if you can get them fixed. You a Toolshed user?
Oh, definitely. It's great to see that Toolshed is being worked on. For me, it's a must. I mean, if you're transferring disk images or working with cassettes, you definitely need Toolshed.
Yeah, I'm always surprised how many people, it seems like every week somebody shows up on the Facebook group or whatever and say, hey, I need to do this where I need to extract a file from a disk image, or I need to put a file into a disk image. I think the latest one was, I want to write some basic program with a text editor on my modern machine and then get it onto a disk image for the CoCo. It's like, well, Toolshed has exactly the tools you need there, right there, built into the copy command. There's a couple of options. But it's like people have never heard of Toolshed. I think some people have trouble building Toolshed for Windows because, it is sort of built more in a Unix style of makefile. But I think there are people who've done that build, and I think you can download them. So I don't know, maybe we should find that somewhere. But
I've done the build on the Windows machine. It works fine.
Okay. Well, so some people seem to have trouble with it, but maybe they just don't have everything they need installed or something like that. Moving on. Looking at the RetroPorts blog, which is Mark McDougall's blog. If you keep up with his blog, Mark has, over the years, has done a number of ports of old games to a variety of computers. He did Load Runner to the CoCo 3 roughly last year, and lately he's been working on a game from the ZX Spectrum called Night Lore, one that I was not very familiar with, but I guess it has some notoriety, and it's what do you call that perspective where it's at the corner?
Isometric?
Isometric, that's right. And I guess it's from a list of games that are grouped as Filmation games. I guess Filmation was a rendering technique related to the isometric gameplay. I don't know a lot about it, but he's been working on that. Anyway, it's one of his recent blog posts. He announces that he's working towards getting a demo together for CoCo Fest. I'm kind of cooperating with Mark on that. It's probably more of a win because I know he's gotten something that will work already, and I think he's still making some improvements. But so when he sends me his finalized demo image, I'll burn it onto an EEPROM and should have it available to show it at my table at CoCo Fest. For those that want to see what Mark is working on, kind of hoping to work out a deal with Mark and me or Neil or somebody that can work on doing some publishing of cartridges for game developers in the CoCo community, including Mark and whoever else we can talk into. We'll have to work out the details. I'm not sure what they'll all be right now, but hopefully we can provide a service to get some cartridges published, and with the least hassle to the authors, and hopefully provide them at least a little bit of a hobby income on some of this stuff. This is not an announcement. This is more of a pre-announcement, I guess. But that's why Mark is interested, or well, I'm sure he's interested in getting his stuff out anyway. But that is one of the things I know Mark is interested in, and part of why he's interested in getting something ready for CoCo Fest. So we have something to show there. What do you think, Neil?
I'm looking forward to see that game in action.
Yeah, are you looking forward to building some of his cartridges?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That'd be nice. It's going to be great to see more CoCo games on cartridge format.
That would be really cool.
Yeah.
So,
not that I don't like discs, I'm a floppy guy, but cartridges, I mean, they last forever.
Yeah, almost as long as cassette tapes, right? Oh, wait. Oh, no. Well, anyway, moving on. There was a post a couple of weeks ago from Brian Taylor. I'm not really familiar with Brian. I don't know if he's new to the community. Says he recently obtained a CoCo 2 with a lot of peripherals, including disk drives, multiplayer, RS-232, cassette tape. He's hoping to load some code through the RS-232 pack. And I think I talked about this in an earlier episode, talking about the RS-232 pack. There is some fairly simple file transfer capabilities built into that pack. They're so simple that they're kind of different than what you're used to, even if you're doing file transfers back in the day. What he's trying to do is possible, or at least as what I understand who he's trying to do, putting code onto the CoCo through the serial pack. It definitely is possible. I've done it before. Tried to provide some advice to him on how to do that. I don't think I got much response, so hopefully it worked out for him. If not, Brian, feel free to send me an email, or if you or somebody else who was in the thread and didn't understand what I was trying to say but would like to know, feel free to send me an email. We'll see if we can work something out. All right, moving on. So we have a link posted by S. Clamor. And I've seen the name for a long time in the community, but I don't know what the S stands for, so I only put S in here. So, Mr. Clamor, feel free to fill me in on what the S stands for. And if it's Stephanie, then I'm Miss Clamor or whatever. I have no idea. Chances are it's probably a guy, let's be honest. But if it's not, I'll be happy to be corrected. Anyway, he posts a link to a crowdfunding site called Verkami, which I don't know much about it. Looks like it must be in Europe because the funds are denominated in euros. So it's a project called ZX Uno. So basically, it's a board. It's an FPGA board that's designed to emulate, or to be capable of emulating the ZX Spectrum or ZX Spectrum. But the point being is that it's actually going to be capable of emulating a lot of different stuff. And so, if you're going to build a box that can emulate an old computer, the point was, well, maybe you could get this box and then target the CoCo 3 FPGA code, or maybe the code that Roger Taylor's been working on, and create a CoCo on top of it. And so we've sort of talked about that a couple of times. I suggested that for the MIST FPGA board, and of course, we already have the DE. One boards that can do that, although they don't look very much like computers. I included the link because it's kind of a continuation of the theme. If you're interested in FPGA, CoCo simulation, emulation, or recreation, or whatever you consider it, you may want to look at the ZX Uno platform. All right, so here we have a bit of an announcement, or maybe it's a pre-announcement. It's not a real product, I think, but get an announcement from Chris Smith that he is 3D printing a case for the CoCo SDC. I don't know if this is just an educational exercise or if he has some problem with the CoCo SDC cases available from John Strong. Maybe he just wants to do it himself, has his own artistic interpretation to put on it, or whatever. More power to him. I think it's great. John Strong's in there replying, doesn't seem to be upset. So if John's not upset, I'm certainly not upset. Like I said, I generally don't believe in people being able to claim projects anyway. So I think it's great to see somebody out there trying to do a project. Looks like he's going to have SD slots, LEDs, It's I don't know. It's rendered in a kind of a teal color with a Tandy logo. Sometimes that rendering software kind of picks whatever color it wants for you. So who knows what he'll actually print it out in. But we'll see. So there may be another source for CoCo SDC cases out there from Chris Smith.
Yeah, it looks like Chris just wanted to try one on his own. That's what I got out of that post, which was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely cool. Okay, moving on is a Facebook post from Brian Blake, who is the man behind TandyCoco.com. So Brian has been doing some updates to his website, forum site. I think he wants it to be more of a social hub for the community. It's like I say, even Brian often says, well, some people will question whether we need this, but I don't think it hurts. I think he's right. It makes sense for if people want to communicate a different way, let's provide a way for them to do so. Anyways, he's added a YouTube video page, separated the CoCo links from the overview page, moved them to their own page. He's got some tech articles. I think in a later post he said something about he's got some sort of social media connector now. It looked like you can actually post to Facebook from his site. So it's pretty cool. Like I said, if you're into the forum style communications, TandyCoco.com is a good place to look for some of that. Like I said, we're happy to report on any kind of outlet for CoCo communications. So, Brian, keep up the good work.
I think it's a good thing he's doing this because not a lot of people use Facebook as well. Lots do, but lots don't, especially in the retro community.
Yeah, there are a lot of Luddites, whatever, that don't want to do that.
We see it on the list, from time to time. People put, I don't have a Facebook account or I won't use that site for whatever reason.
Yeah.
This will give another opportunity to somebody.
Yeah, I'm not sure why people are like that, but they are. All right, moving on. There's a mailing list post from Phil Harvey Smith titled Generating 6847 Syncs. And so I think the main announcement here is that Phil is working on a board to adapt the 6847 video output on the PAL Dragons, at least, to SCART RGB, which, of course, SCART is a video signaling standard connector common in Europe. You ever use SCART up there in Canada, Neil? Do they have them up there?
No.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. You could have this RGB connection to the TVs in Europe. Of course, then the SCART connection actually is complicated enough. It actually has a couple of different kinds of signaling that can be in there, and you can implement one and not the other. So the fact that something has a SCART cable doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work with everything else that accepts a SCART connection.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think there's some signaling pins to basically say what kind of signals you accept or are generating. And you can have like composite video on a SCART connector versus RGB video on a SCART connector. And then I think they might have an equivalent to like an S video where you separate out the color from the luma from the chroma. And so anyway, and you don't have to implement all of them, is my understanding, or at least not everything does. Anyway, so Phil is working on something to do that for the CoCo 2. He has a similar board for the Acorn Atom, which, as we mentioned before, the Atom used the 6847 as well. But he's asking for some advice on some CPLD code written in VHDL, it looks like. Anyway, it's just sort of an announcement that Phil's out there working on this board, and number two, it's just kind of a neat little window into what kind of discussions we have on the mailing list. So if you like kind of in-depth technical discussions like that, be sure to check out the mailing list. Okay, moving on. So we've talked about Ed Snyder many times, mentioned his work many times. He's kind of a prolific contributor to the CoCo community over the past couple of years, particularly for hardware related to video. Seems to be an interest for Ed. Anyway, he posted a link, said, time to set aside the CAD tools and pick up the soldering iron and do some builds. And so he had pictures of a bunch of different boards that he's worked on and had sent off to get the boards back. And so he's got like I said, a number of boards covered here, one of which I think is his multi-pack alternative that he's been working on, one of which I think is his board for a expansion for the MC10 that's similar to the MCX 128 in some ways, but it's essentially a way to put like a ROM pack on the MC10. He has a video board that was intended to be for component style video, which I think may have worked in some instances, but it turns out that most TVs that accept component won't accept the video signal at 240p, which is what the CoCo puts out. So it's kind of like a board that's only going to work for certain television combinations. So I think he mentioned he was setting aside that project. Yeah, so here's the project where he's working on a board to take the 6847 and transplant it to another board and generate VGA output from it. So lots of cool stuff going on there with Ed. It's cool that he keeps us informed of what he's working on. Ed's a pretty easy guy to deal with. Nice guy overall. Definitely is someone who wants to help out in the community. Very cool stuff. So Ed, thanks for sharing. Glad to see some of that stuff coming. And like I said, I'm not going to mention Ed's later post about his MPI other than to say that he is working on a multi-pack interface that has, I think, 2 slots and seems to be making some progress there. That's
dubbed the mini MPI.
Yeah. It's 2 slots. I think the second slot can be configured in software to act like either slot 2, 3, or 4. I don't think that's... He said as for hardware that needs to be in a certain slot. I don't think there really is any hardware that needs to be in a certain slot, but there are OS 9 device descriptors that by default expect hardware to be in certain slots, like the floppy controller is supposed to be in slot 4, and I think the serial port is supposed to be in slot 1. I think it's for accommodating some of that sort of thing. But anyway, I think he's got a rev on that design. It's going to add some buffering and some other stuff. It's cool. It's good to see. Like I said, the multi-pack thing is something that people seem to be really interested in having. There don't seem to be enough of them floating around to satisfy the demand. So I'm glad to see somebody's trying to satisfy it.
Makes you wonder if these MPIs hit the market, if the original ones will go down in price on eBay.
Presumably they will. They probably won't hit the floor, but one never knows, right? Okay, so the next one is again from this Jason Lee Steer. Jason, again, I hope I'm pronouncing your name reasonably well. So Jason has a project where he has created you've heard a lot of the, especially people who like to play on games on the emulators. A lot of people have mentioned how they'd like to be able to use the original CoCo joysticks with their emulators. And so Jason's project here, he's taking an Arduino style board. I think that's what he said he's using. And he is interfacing it. It's got the analog connections to the CoCo joysticks, and then he has a USB connection that goes back into a regular PC, and it emulates what's called a HID or human interface device style of USB device. And so you can play CoCo games on your emulator using the original CoCo style joysticks. Again, he's published a Git repository out on GitHub with the code involved with his Arduino board. I think it's an Arduino. It might be just an AVR of some sort. Anyway, one way or another, if you're interested in microcontrollers, you can figure it out. And it looks like maybe he's had, some problems with the initial design, and he's reworking some of it. But people have talked about getting this style of design for a while. It really doesn't seem like technically that big a problem. Somebody just has to work it out, and so I'm glad to hear that Jason is doing that.
I was taken by surprise to see that posted. That just came out of nowhere, and it's neat to see. It just looks funny to see a Tandy Deluxe joystick with a USB port. That's all I got to say.
Yeah. Well, so there is another project out there that kind of, I think the link resurfaced as part of that discussion, and I'm trying to think of who it is right now. But there's a project that somebody took was the craft style joystick, which is essentially the same as the Tandy Deluxe joystick, but for the PC, or maybe it's for the PC Junior. And they had a specific board that they tied it into that created a USB output for it. I think that pretty much the exact same project could be done for the CoCo. It's just a different way of doing things. Anyway, like I said, it's good to have the project out there. I prefer to see people playing on the original hardware. Maybe the original hardware won't last forever. And, far be it from me to tell anyone they have to use original hardware. If they just really want to play Clowns and Balloons on their PC, I'm happy for them to do it in a way that makes them feel like they're having a good time. How about you, Neil? Do you like to play Clowns and Balloons on your emulator?
I'm not an emulator kind of guy. I mean, I do appreciate them, but I'm into the real hardware here.
Yeah,
I don't take a lot of room, but
you want to load it off the cassette and.
Oh yeah, just even hearing that sound off the floppy drives or the tape drives.
Pretty funny. All right. Well, moving on. So the title is 5 megabytes. Comes from Gary Becker. So Gary Becker is the man behind the CoCo 3 FPGA. In the FPGA simulation of a CoCo 3, aptly named. So he says he has added support for up to 6 meg of memory in the FPGA code, but realistically only 5 meg will be available. The FPGA comes with 512K, but you can replace that with a 1 meg chip, and you can add a wire for an additional address line. And he's going to have an analog board. So he's going to have an add-on board for the DE1 that he calls the analog board. It's going to have some extra memory. One way or another, you're going to end up being able to address 5 meg of memory on the CoCo 3 FPGA with the analog board. Not really sure what the technical details are of that. I don't know if there's any standard for that, if they're going to follow the Paul Barton standard for expanded memory, or if they're going to make something up new for the CoCo 3 FPGA. I'm not sure. But if you're interested in that and looking forward to having extra memory on your CoCo 3 FPGA, you may want to go track down the recent posts on the Yahoo group and figure out what's going on.
All I have to say is 5 megabytes of memory is all you'll ever need.
So true, so true. All right, so our next item comes from someone who's clearly a cat lover. Mr. Neil Blanchard says there's another reason to make it out to CoCo Fest. And this is the project we mentioned in the intro. So basically I designed the board for converting the digital inputs from a Sega style joypad or it could be an Atari 2600. Added a little switching circuit that's triggered through the RS-232 port so that you can use the extra buttons on the Sega joypad. And so I did this and made Neil aware of it, and he got excited, and Neil wanted to build some boards. Neil, I'm going to let you take it from there.
Well, I'm getting excited to announce that going to have a pile of them ready exclusively for CoCo Fest. Then after that, I guess they'll be on mail order. But this adapter, I've built a few already. I've actually spent some time playing on it and trying out different games that I played on the CoCo 3. And I have to say, it is incredible. Like, I mean, my scores have actually, I can't believe I was on level 10 of, Xenix there, that Galaxian clone. And I could never do that on the Tandy Deluxe joystick. I find it easier to play on a gamepad, but maybe that's just my generation and my age where I grew up with, right? But
yeah.
Definitely a cool device.
Well, I'm glad it's working out for you. I've got a couple of prototypes I've built here. And like I say, I think it helps certainly with some games and some gamers just deal better with the joypad style. Some people prefer the Sega Master System style of joypad. Some people prefer the Genesis style of joypad.
But the other cool thing with this device is that even if you prefer a nice joystick, I mean, now you have the option of, using joysticks from, like the good Waiko ones from back in the day,
sure.
Stuff on the Atari, Commodore, etc.
Well, especially for CoCo 1 games, you might as well use the Atari joysticks. You only need one button anyway. If you're going to do a CoCo 3 game that uses 2 buttons, of course, you'll need to use one of the Sega joypads. And, hopefully at some point there'll be some CoCo 3 games written specifically to use the adapter where you'll have to have the Genesis joypads. The hardware I think the hardware should be able to be used with the 6-button Sega joypads, but I haven't got the software worked out for it. So for now, I definitely can do the 3-button Sega joypads or 3+1. Hopefully we'll be able to do the 6+1 at some point. And imagine all the cool fighting games, which I think was the real reason we needed so many buttons to begin with. But
hopefully
I don't know.
Inspire some programmers to take advantage of that.
Yeah, although I don't really want to inspire too many fighting games, but that's just me.
Not a fan of them?
Not in general, no. But I guess it'd be okay if other people want to play, especially if it's my design for the joypads. I'm happy to have that contribution. Okay, moving on. We have one from Glenn Vandenbigler, and his subject is it's a mailing-list post. The lounge is not dead yet. So poor Glenn. He's had he's got his blogs where he posts about his living situation and his trials and tribulations, and so I guess he got kicked out of his place where he's been living, and I'm not sure the exact reason. I don't think it's so much that they didn't like him as much as they had different plans for the place or something like that. But one way or another, he had to relocate, and he lives in the frozen north, so I don't know how easy it is to move up there. He talked about getting a truck and moving stuff, and he had to move his furniture by himself. And, and mixed in with all that, he had to ship out some orders. And I think he may have had some conflicts with some of his customers over the shipping. He covered that in his blogs, too. Anyway, like I said, Glenn does, I think overall he's a friend of the community. He has some cool stuff that shows up at his place from time to time. If you like looking for CoCo stuff at Glenn's website, you probably want to keep checking it out, see what's available. And, you never know what's going to show up.
And just to stick up for Glenn a little bit on the shipping, if anybody thinks his prices are really expensive, well, you know what? The shipping in Canada is astronomical. It really is. And if you're shipping from Canada to the States, I mean, even a small little item will run you $15 minimum with tracking. Like you cannot. There's no option to ship something cheap unless it's in an envelope and it's under 500 grams.
Yeah. When we don't even know how much 500 grams weighs.
Yeah, I never thought of
well, I will say, in truth, based on the private conversations, or at least the off-the-air conversations that I have with Neil. Neil is a big fan of the U.S. Postal Service. And if you're like me, that in and of itself is so amazing that it gives some truth or some credibility to his statement that the Canada postal system has some serious flaws. So anybody that loves the USPS in general is comes under a little bit of scrutiny from me. Anyway, all right. Well, moving on. Have another announcement from Pierre Sarrazin, version 0.1.21 of CMOC C-Lite compiler released. So we've talked a lot about CMOC over time. Oh, you know what? Looking here, I must have missed an announcement because looking at the website, he's got 0.1.22 released today. So so there must be another announcement out there somewhere that I just haven't seen yet.
hot off the press.
Exactly. So fixed an optimizer bug that affected increments on a struct field in some situations. The previous version, some low-level optimizations contributed by Jamie Cho. Pragma limit X directive. So if your program gets too big, it'll stop the compilation. You can reference C functions in inline assembly. I don't know. Check out the link in the show notes to his release notes at his CMARC page. Again, it's cool to see this tool continue to be developed. Seems to be something with some legs. Seems to be also making some inroads in the Vectrix community. So, Vectrix folks, you're welcome. You can borrow our CoCo friend for a little while as long as you give him back unharmed. So, just like we lent Mike Rowan out to the Trash Talk podcast, as long as I give him back, we're free. We'll feel free to pimp out you guys to to other podcasts and other communities, as long as it benefits the whole, right? Neil gets quiet because he doesn't know what I'm going to send him off to do. All right, well, moving on. Okay, the next link is from Brett Gordon, and he's got his Phuzix actually booting on a CoCo 2 with Tormod Volden's Dragon NX32 port. Mentioned that Tormod had done a lot of work with Nitrous 9. He's also been doing some work out with Brett on Phuzix. I know Tormod has a memory board that fits in the Dragon in the CoCo 2. I think that's what's being used here to kind of put the CoCo 2 in the league of hardware able to run Phuzix. Anyway, it's cool to know some guys are working on some stuff, making some progress, and sharing it with us. I mean, that's kind of what the whole thing's about, don't you think?
Absolutely.
So, Brett, thanks for letting us know about that. Tormod, thanks for working on this stuff. It's great to hear about this stuff. It's inspirational. It makes me happy. Okay, one more mention from Steve Strobridge, the OG Stevie Stro. Along with all his videos and his live marathon gaming stuff, he's now got some interviews with a number of notable CoCo people, including me, Curtis Boyle, Rick Adams, Nick Morentis, John Strong. So anyway, he's grouped these videos. Some of them are rather lengthy, a couple of hours with Rick Adams. And he's got a playlist out on YouTube, so we'll put the link in the show notes. You can go check it out. If you don't feel like watching the gaming marathons, maybe you can watch one of the interviews and learn something about the CoCo or what's going on in the community. Cool stuff. You checking out any of Steve's videos there, Neil?
Yep, I've checked out a few, actually. Very nice. I like those effects he does in them.
Oh, yeah. Moving on, the next item is from Lee Patterson, who's got his website, the 8-Bit Coder, and he has Lee is the guy that's behind the bouncy ball game that we talked about in some previous episodes. Hoping to meet Lee here in a couple of weeks out at CoCo Fest.
That's right. He's coming down.
Yep, and so he's posted a new blog entry. It's a lengthy entry called Optimizing an Imaginary Sprite. So one of the cool things that's happening on the Facebook groups, I guess, we get some coordination and cooperation between folks with some working on some of the projects. I think probably this came out of Paul Thayer's project where he's working on this caveman game, which I think is partly in BASIC and maybe partly in assembly language. And he's working with Simon Jonason, who's helping him with some of the assembly language stuff. And so he was working on some sprite routines for mixing sprite data with background data. And so he posted some code and said, I've been working on optimizing this. What do you think? And some other folks kind of chimed in and said, well, I think you could do this. Or, hey, well, what if you do that? And then as things go, you get a couple of revisions, and then somebody else looked at it before, didn't see anything, but now that you've revised it, they say, oh, well, now that I see this, you could do that. Anyway, he's got like a 9-part blog on talking about this optimization of this sprite routine. So it's kind of a fun read. Check out some of that stuff and see what they were working on, what kind of changes they make, maybe learn a little bit about 6809 assembly in the process. It's a good read, and it's fun. You check out any of that stuff, Neil?
Yeah, I've checked out his blog a few times. I know it's not really related, but I like his name, how he goes by 8-Bit Coder. I think that's kind of cool.
You like that?
Yeah. Nice to see everybody helping each other, too.
Yeah, it's good people working together. That's nice.
As I know Simon, he's tried to help me a few times with, he's trying to get me going on assembly.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, so I mentioned Alan Cox a little earlier. So along with working on Phuzix, Alan has been doing some work with the MC10. And then now it kind of, maybe not quite out of the blue. I mean, a lot of people knew he was working on some of this stuff, but sort of without much ado, he made an announcement on the MC10 Yahoo group. It says, I've uploaded Scott Adams' Adventureland and the set of Brian Howarth Mysterious Adventures. These should now all work and have working score save load. As far as I'm aware, they're now fully functional. It says I'll get some time. I'll upload the other shareware, freeware release Scott Adams games, Pirate through Return to Pirate, along with Buckaroo Banzai. Then he says the game generator source is at, and he's got a GitHub link. So that should also properly convert the Hulk, Spider-Man, Super Grand, Gremlins, Robin of Sherwood, and Seas of Blood, except the FF Combat, which is specially coded. I'm not sure familiar with Seas of Blood, so I'm not sure what that means. Says he has not included those games because, as far as you know, they've never been made freely available. But if you have a legitimate copy, you can generate the relevant C10 file using the tools. And then he has a list of other games that are not handled. The final thing is, in anyway, with luck, that's still 26 new MC10 games, plus another 6 if you have them for other platforms. Kind of in a single-handed, one fell swoop, 32 new games for the MC10. Wow. Not bad.
One way to boost the library.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. Definitely thank you to Alan there for on behalf of the MC10 folks. Good to see that kind of activity, and definitely setting a high bar. You like those kind of adventure games, Neil?
Yeah, I do. I've been a big fan of those games, actually.
Cool. Well, now when you get your MC10, you've got
yes,
a couple of dozen Scott Adams adventure games you can load up and play on your MC10. Learn to hate the MC10 keyboard.
yeah, so I hear.
All right. So the next announcement comes from Nick Morentis. He's got another Popstar Pilot blog entry, number 26. Seems like that's been something every month lately. So if he's going to have a regular schedule, you might have to drop him out of the announcements because then they're not news, right? So he calls this one the final countdown and kind of makes it sound like it's getting close to a release. I hope that's true. Got a list of changes. I won't read them to you because then what fun would it be for you to read the blog? So go check it out. If you're a Popstar Pilot fan, you might be getting close to some satisfaction on that one. Let's hope.
Yeah. After reading that blog entry, it looks like he's pretty close.
Okay, well, I've got one kind of sad one and then a couple more that are more lighthearted to alleviate the mood. But so this message, I forget where I found it, actually. I think somebody posted it in one of the more generic retro computing groups. The title of this, it's essentially a blog, is that the 6th stage of grief is retro computing. And so basically this is the story that just talks about a kid who had a friend, it's like sounds like an older gentleman who kind of befriended him in the neighborhood, and all above board, of course. Someone he had known in the past, but he learned that the person had died, and then he got to thinking about their friendship and how they had done a lot of work together or using the Commodore Amiga, I guess, and how there was this technical connection for them, but it actually how they built a friendship around it, and it's kind of some reminiscing about how things were done back in the day and whatever else, and some of it delves into some technical stuff, but then it talks about his personal connection to his friend Tom, and how he kind of relived some of that thinking about Tom after he had passed, which it's kind of a familiar story. Sometimes you don't figure out how important somebody was to you until they're gone, right? I think we've all probably had that experience. But I thought it was touching because that's part of it's easy to see that nostalgia for the past is a component in being involved in retro computing. But it's not just pure nostalgia. It's not kind of the way we all enjoy sitting in a 50s car with fins on the back or whatever. It's just nostalgia or or whatever. But there's actual people there. There's people behind that. I know that's what keeps me going to CoCo Fest is the people. Definitely made some good friends there. I've been going to CoCo Fest long enough that I've actually had a couple of people I knew through CoCo Fest that have passed away. And these are people that I've met a half a dozen times a year apart. And yet when I learned over the email that they had died in a state far away, some of them actually sat and cried. Because you just get to know people, and they remind you of people that you knew before, or people in the past, or other people in your life, or whatever. You get to know them, and you get that personal connection. And it's a cliche perhaps, but I think we're missing a lot of personal connections in life these days. Part of it's just getting older, but part of it's the different world we live in. And I think some of us maybe. That's part of what our nostalgia is for not just for the old computers, but maybe for the times that the computers came from and the way people used to relate to each other. Anyway, there's a link in the show notes, the 6 Stage of Grief in Retrocomputing. A 6 Stage of Grief is retrocomputing. It's a little bit of a tearjerker, but I think if you enjoy feeling emotion, then you'll enjoy reading it. Did you get a chance to read this one, Neil?
No, I haven't, but I'm going to check it out. But I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, the retro computing hobby, that's actually one thing that draws me to it is the people. That's why I like going to CoCo Fest and being on the mailing list and the Facebook group and so on. It's just a great bunch of guys.
Yep, definitely. And some of them have gone too soon. All right, anyway, moving on. Like I said, I've got a couple of extra news items to clear the air, lighten the mood a little bit before we end the topic. Some of us might be familiar with a print magazine from the past called Micro. Started out as Micro, the 6502 journal, and later became Micro, the 6502 and 6809 journal, or 6502/6809 journal. Anyway, I guess the owners of, or the publishers of Micro, Robert M. Tripp has granted permission as the sole copyright owner to some people who have put scans of Micro up on the web, PDFs. They have, looks like, about 8 years worth of it on there. Coverage of obviously it used to be called the 6502 journal. You're going to have a lot of coverage of the Apple II, and some of the other 6502's systems are a little heavy, but in the later issues, once they become the 6502/6809 journal, there is some color computer coverage and some generic 6809 coverage. It could be of interest to the people listening to this podcast. So, if you're done reading all your back issues of Rainbow Magazine and the other color computer magazines, here's one more you should add to your reading list: the Micro, the 6502/6809 journal.
Great to see another magazine saved.
Definitely, very exciting. Okay, so one more. I think in previous episodes I've mentioned the Stellation 2 the Mill card, which is a card for the Apple II. That plugs into the Apple II, but it has a 6809 processor on it. And so it basically allows you to turn the Apple II into a 6809-based machine, or at least the 6502 on the Apple II can turn over control to the 6809 on the card. So there were a couple of versions of the card, or really I think just one version of the card that had a certain memory map that unfortunately was not really conducive to running OS 9. And so then they came out with a daughter card you can install. You could pull out a chip and plug in this card, and that would change the memory map that the 6809 on this card saw, so that it was conducive to running OS 9. But unfortunately, this was not every one of these cards had that, obviously. It's why it was a daughter card. And unfortunately for me, the one that I have doesn't have the daughter card. And so that was one of my back burner projects that someday I could build my own daughter card to perform that function. Either that, or maybe I could figure out how to make Nitrous 9 or Fusix or something work with the other memory map. Anyway, just this week, someone came onto the Yahoo group for the Apple 6809 Yahoo group, which covers installation to the mill and some other similar cards, announcing that he was in progress on building a replacement daughter card for the mill card. And within a couple of days, he announced that he had his prototype up and working and was hoping to produce, go into production on reproduction cards. So very exciting. If, like me, you have one of the mill cards that doesn't have the Nitrous 9 daughter card, you may be in luck. You may be able to buy one hopefully very soon. Very exciting stuff. Good news all around, huh?
I can see porting Farfall to that now.
Well, that's possible. There is an Apple II port for Farfall already, but of course it's on the 6502. Well, I think that is more than enough news for the evening. So we're going to call an end to this segment, and we'll be back with some feedback. All right. And now we're on our way to the Vintage Computer Festival in Atlanta. What do you have to say for yourself, Junior?
I prefer Indiana.
We named the dog Indiana. Okay, now we're back with some feedback. We do have feedback from a couple of listeners this time around. No audio feedback this time. I guess Mike was busy with his new trash talk friends.
Cheating on us.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, we have two separate comments from L. Curtis Boyle. I think he got one out and then forgot that he wanted to say something else. So talking about the Orchestra 90 segment, he had a few comments about programming the 6-bit DAG versus the Orchestra 90, and points out that while John Strong's games supported Orchestra 90, that I don't think that Steve Bjork's did. I think I mentioned in my segment that maybe they did, but I think he's right. I don't think Steve Bjork's games supported the Orchestra 90 after all. I was talking about in the Kim Guy game when he was porting that over to OS 9. I guess he found that there were 8-bit samples. And so he was able to just use the 8-bit samples to feed the DAC on the Frank Hogg's Frank Hogg Labs TC9, and then he could also then feed them to the Orchestra 90. Anyway, he sums up that message with the quote that, quote, "To me, the mod tracker is the best example of using," and of course, the Orchestra 90 is what he's talking about. So the mod tracker is an audio player from John Kowalski, Sockmaster, for playing the mod-style audio files, which originated in the Amiga community. What mod trackers are basically collections of sampled sounds and then orchestration files that kind of string them together, and that seemed like a reasonable description.
They're basically pieced together. It's a bunch of samples, and it makes it like an actual song or a remix. A lot of remixes of demo scenes seem to use those files back in the day.
Oh yeah, definitely. But yeah, I think they're built around some samples, which is why they were, they originated on the Amiga, which also had a DAC for playing samples rather than a sound generator. So they're a nice fit for playing on the CoCo, including on the Orchestra 90, because like you say, it's a DAC. You actually put audio samples in there rather than trying to set up a sound generator.
I remember back in the day with the Amiga, or a friend of mine had an Amiga and I had the CoCo 3, I used to get teased all the time because I couldn't play mod files. Well, then when I got back into the CoCo scene, what do I find on doing some Google searches? I find this mod player, this mod tracker, and I was blown away. The Color Computer 3 can actually play in full stereo sound with animation oscilloscope waveforms.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Pretty cool stuff. But I don't know. Yeah, I think that's one of those where the Amiga guys always seized on to some stuff that they felt made their machine superior. And while it was a nice machine, a lot of the stuff they seized on as somehow making their machine superior maybe wasn't necessarily all that much of a strength. Or in some cases, I don't know. I mean, being able to play samples is cool and definitely adds flexibility, but it also means you have to shuffle samples. Now, of course, in the Amiga's case, they did it with DMA, so the CPU, I guess, wasn't really involved. So maybe it was superior in that case, but I don't know. The big thing with the Amiga was always the preemptive multitasking, and no other machine can do that. And said, well, of course, the CoCo was doing it quite a bit earlier with OS 9. Anyway, we don't want to pick any fights here. Certainly not with any rabid Amiga users, because they just won't stop anyway. All right, moving on. Curtis had a second comment. This one's directed at you, Neil. Pointing out that Time Bandit, which was the game you reviewed in the last episode, Time Bandit originally started on the TRS-80 Model 1/3. So I don't know if that was something that you mentioned or not.
No, I didn't know. I actually wasn't aware of the Model 1 and 3 versions. It almost makes me want to get an emulator just to try it. And the other thing he did mention, we can call it a bug report in my game segment, is that I mentioned that Computer Shack and Mitchtron were two separate companies, but actually Computer Shack, or he writes to me, he said Computer Shack actually changed its name to Mitchtron, and that's due to legal reasons from Radio Shack.
Huh. How about that? All right. Well, thank you, Curtis, for contacting us, providing us that feedback. So, like I said, we love having some input from our listeners. That way we know people are actually listening. So we know Mike Rowan is listening, and he tells us that, he says, quote, "You guys deserve a lot of credit for creating some great buzz in the CoCo community." Well, I hope so. That's kind of part of the intent, is create some buzz, keep people excited, keep people interested. Of course, we want to get all those people to come to CoCo Fest.
That's the goal.
But even if you don't come to CoCo Fest, having a nice, lively community for the rest of us who do make it to CoCo Fest to talk about, that's still a big bonus, don't you think?
For sure.
All right. Very good. Well, thanks, Mike. It's always good to hear from you. Hope to see you at CoCo Fest in a couple of weeks. All right. Final feedback item. This comes from Brian Blake. He says, I was the one writing the CoCo content on the RTM, which is a Retro Gaming Times Monthly. So on the RTM before its demise, I intend to write articles in the future. So we mentioned that the Retro Gaming Times, which had formerly been Retro Gaming Times Monthly, but the Retro Gaming Times had been relaunched. We mentioned that in last episode. And so it sounds like Brian hopes to provide some CoCo content there. So we should all be looking for that. Brian, if you do get something published, make sure to let us know. So we'll include that information in our future episodes. All right. Well, I think that covers our feedback this week. No audio feedback. Well, I'm sorry, but we do like to get the audio feedback. So somebody send us some audio, even if it's something silly.
Something we can mix in there.
Yeah, or, if you happen to find some long-lost Radio Shack commercial on YouTube or Isaac Asimov singing the praises of the CoCo or something like that, we'd like to hear about that stuff too. Anyway, send your feedback to feedback@cococrew.org or any of the other addresses mentioned earlier in the program, and we would love to hear from you.
Hold tight while we pause for the cause.
You are listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast with Neil Blanchard and John Linville. Like how I switched those names around? I'm the original gamer Stevie Stroh, and I'm a CoCo Nut. And if you're a CoCo Nut too, then visit I'mACoCoNut.com for all kinds of cool CoCo links, including my YouTube gaming videos. So visit I'mACoCoNut.com, and long live the CoCo. Back to you, Neil and John.
All right. Well, now we're back. As we've been saying for several months now, that our host discussions have been popular. We continue to believe that. If we're wrong, then you need to send us some feedback to tell us that we're wrong. But certainly, at least our printer discussion seems to be the gift that keeps on giving. We get a lot of feedback related to that. Hopefully you enjoyed some of our other topics. Hopefully you'll enjoy the one that we're about to embark upon now. So like I said, my influence on the topic discussion, either whether I invent the topics or when, in this case, I think it largely was Neil's suggestion, but I always like to massage the topics into the form of a question because that's just how I roll. So this month's question is, where do you keep your CoCo stuff? And so the motivation here is I am predicting some new stuff to arrive that I don't want to have to shuffle too much old stuff around to accept. And so I went today and acquired some storage space at a local self-storage location. And that kind of brought us around to the topic of where do you keep your stuff? So I've been talking a lot. I'm going to let Neil talk a little bit about where he keeps his stuff, and I'll chime in as we go. How's that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that when it comes to storage lockers, I think that's it's a bigger thing in the USA than it is in Canada. Because I know for a fact I would definitely like to have a storage locker, but it's not really possible here. It is, but it's really expensive. It's just, it's almost not even feasible. I looked at getting a storage locker when I was moving about 5 years ago, and it was out of the question. Where I keep my CoCo stuff, I keep it in the basement. I got a pretty nice setup down here. It's kind of like a little mini museum, and I got a storage room with extra CoCo parts, just in case something fails. Trying not to hoard, but I guess what did we say in that other episode? Once you hit 4 or 5.
Yeah, well, one man's hoarding is another man's collecting, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I won't judge you too much on hoarding unless you're hoarding the stuff that I want, which is ultimately, I think, what most people complain about. Nobody's mad about the person who has 25 copies of Clowns and Balloons. They're mad about the people who have 17 multi-pack interfaces and want to put pictures of them on Facebook.
I was just going to say, and for the record, no, I'm not hoarding a whole pile of MPIs, so we're safe there.
Oh, Lord. Well, so
where do you keep your CoCo collection?
Well, I have a lot of stuff I've collected over the years. Originally, before I got too deep into CoCo, I actually was more of an arcade collector. So having arcade cabinets, I do have a pinball machine, which is a long story. Anyway, so I kind of developed a need for some, like you say, cold storage or storage lockers kind of early on. And so I have a storage locker with arcade stuff in it. And I think I have a couple of CoCo hardware items in there, but I've never really wanted to keep media in there because, the weather, even though it's dry, you still get a lot of temperature variation. And so definitely no diskettes or cassettes out there. I don't even really like to keep paper in those kind of conditions because it kind of degrades. Plastic gets brittle. I don't. Some of it just is old; it gets brittle. But I think it's not too good for it to be exposed to heat. It gets pretty hot around here in the summertime. 100 degrees Fahrenheit is not uncommon. And then
nothing wrong with that temperature.
Well, depends on. I think maybe if you lived in it, you'd like it less. So I don't like to keep much CoCo stuff in storage that's not climate controlled. So I end up with a lot of CoCo stuff in the house. I have a bonus room above the garage that is packed with stuff a bit more than most people would really like to. More than what most people would be proud of. Let's put it that way. And I have both CoCo stuff and some other retro stuff. Well, like I said, so I did just get a storage locker today, and I went ahead and sprung for an indoor facility with climate control. It's actually the place sells itself as a wine storage place, so you can get small storage lockers that are intended to store your wine collection. I'm not storing any wine in mine, but the climate control appealed to me so that I could have a place kind of off-site where I could stick media, including paper and diskettes and cassettes and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I had to pay. I'm paying about $1 per square foot per month. You can kind of work that out based on what you think I might need for my collection. But for the climate control, it was about 25 or 30% more than the outdoor stuff, which I thought was worthwhile.
If you want to keep the stuff in good shape, I really think that's a good thing.
Yeah. So, it's a shame. I mean, it's a shame to save this stuff that has been survived 30 or 40 years and then go and shove it somewhere that it deteriorates within 4 or 5. So I don't know. I do have, most of my arcade storage that, like I said, is it's a bigger, there's more storage there because the boxes are bigger. One problem I do have there is even though it's all closed up, it still tends to get a lot of dirt and dust inside. And so it's not too bad on the arcade machines. You kind of brush them off and they look fine. They do kind of collect some dirt inside, but you vacuum them out once in a while. It's not a big deal, but it just feels like a bigger deal when it's your CoCo and you're getting dirt and grime down in the keyboard or all in the motherboard. You got to disassemble everything to get down and to clean it up or whatever, or inside your disk drives, that sort of stuff. So I think it's worthwhile to have climate controlled storage, whether it's in your house. If you're not as crazy as I am, then you can probably keep most of your CoCo stuff in your house. You said you keep yours in the basement. How is your basement? Does it stay nice and dry up there?
It does, yeah. It's pretty dry, and in the summertime I use a dehumidifier, so I keep it nice and dry here, so it doesn't get too humid.
Yeah, so where I live, the water table tends to be fairly high. So people that have basements, a lot of them have to have sump pumps to keep the water out, and even then, it's pretty humid in the basement. You have a lot of problems with mold and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we do have a sump pump here. Most places do, but it's not too bad. As long as you have a dehumidifier for the summer months, it's good. The winter, it's ultra dry. It's almost too dry.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Well, so where else would you keep stuff?
A friend's house.
Yeah, you keep them at a friend's house. The problem is keeping the friend in that case. But I'll tell you, I did have, several years ago, I had an opportunity to get a kind of a big CoCo haul. And somebody posted to the list that they were up in New York and had a bunch of CoCo stuff they wanted to get rid of. And it turned out that they were just a few miles away from where a friend of mine lived. And he happened to be kind of a retro computing person. And so I said, dude, call this guy, tell him where you live, let him drop some stuff off, and I'll come up in a couple of weeks and pick it up. Right? And so he did. And he kind of chuckled when he told me he had done it, but I didn't quite get the message. So I got up there. It may have taken me 3 or 4 weeks, but I went up there, and the guy had basically filled my friend's living room with box after box after box of CoCo stuff. And a lot of it was hardware, but a lot of it was just books. And so I have like these photocopied manuals of CoCo software, like, just pick a name, Telewriter 64 or or whatever kind of comparable era of stuff. I have all kinds of documentation for that sort of stuff on, like you said, they're photographs of dot matrix printouts, or if not photographs, photocopies of dot matrix printouts, bound in Peugeot maintenance binders or whatever. So I still have some of that stuff. But anyway, so yeah, you keep your stuff at your friend's house. Well, you can do that for a while, but I don't recommend it long term.
Yeah.
Mom's house, maybe you can do that. Your mother's house, it probably depends on your mother.
Yeah, that only lasts for so long, by the way. I've learned from experience.
Yeah, well, I didn't lose any CoCo stuff that way, but I definitely have had stuff that I left at my mother's house too long that eventually disappeared with no warning. And I guess you could say, well, I had warning year after year. You could say, well, are you ever going to get rid of that stuff? Well, yeah, eventually I'll get it. Just let me know. So I would think that's implied that, well, call me before you actually throw it out. But no, that didn't work.
Yeah, so the 10-year plan, and then after that, it's kind of a free.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you say, you leave something around 10 years or whatever. Like I had a bunch of old Dungeons and Dragons first edition rules manuals and that sort of stuff that were at my mom's house, and she didn't seem like she was in any hurry to get rid of them. So I was in no hurry to bring them home. And then one day I was like, I should get those out. Where are they? Oh, I don't know. I think they disappeared. What do you mean you think they disappeared? It's like talking to one of the kids, you know? Oh, well. Anyway, so try to avoid just storing your CoCo stuff anywhere where you don't control it. But in terms of physical spaces, best to keep them dry. What do you think about dark versus light, you know, on like the plastic yellowing or whatever? Do you think it makes much difference?
Yeah, you know, I don't know. For one time I used to think that fluorescent lighting caused yellowing on the computers, but I don't really believe that anymore now. I just think it's in the plastic.
Yeah.
Obviously sunlight's going to do it. If you have it, you know, if you have your stuff by a window, that's not good.
Yeah, well, it's like say, definitely you get some machines get darker at different rates than others.
Yeah.
So there must be some environmental factor, but I'm not really sure what it is. And it seems like there's always an example. Well, I had my machine in the window forever and it looks fine. And there'll be somebody else's. I had this in the dark and it looks fine. You know, I had this one next to the hot water heater and it's fine.
Yeah, it's tough to tell. I mean, you know, cigarette smoke will definitely ruin them. That's it for sure.
Well, that definitely you can tell when it's been around a smoker.
Yeah.
You can tell when it's just been in dirt sometimes. Sometimes it's like they've been out and somebody buried them in the dirt.
You know, those ones I actually like because you can bring those back.
Yeah.
Get a good find on a CoCo, you know, for a couple $. That's been in the dirt. That's great.
Well, you know, that's one of those. I do find that, well, retro computers in general, I think, are a lot tougher than people imagine. And CoCos definitely seem to be pretty good. I'm not really scared of getting most CoCos unless I know for sure it's already not working.
Right.
You know, usually you plug them in, they turn them on. Most of the time they work. That's my experience.
Yeah, same here. You know, it's funny. The retro computers are the most durable, and yet they only came with a 30-day warranty. That's something.
Well, it's a different time, you know.
Yeah. I mean, they could have put a 20-year warranty on there, and they still would have been all right.
They would have been all right because the companies would have been gone by the time it expired.
Yeah, that too.
Oh, well.
Here's another question then while we're on this topic. So say you get a storage locker. Do you tell your better half about it?
Well, I think the right answer is yes. Right? It kind of depends on, you know, what sort of finances you have set up, I guess. So, you know, because I don't like to have to remember things. I went ahead and authorized them to charge my credit card for the monthly rent. So if you have a credit card with a different statement and you get the same kind of deal, then I guess you could get away with not telling your spouse. I don't really recommend it.
No.
But, you know, it depends on you know, your exact situation, I guess. But yeah, I guess the problem is, you know, there's always going to be that person who there's always that spouse that it's like, oh, well, you went and got some storage. Well, that's great. I've been wanting to find a place to put that old couch that we got from my mother's house when she died, or I've been wanting to find a place to put that statue I sculpted that I just can't get rid of, or you know, whatever. We all have crazy spouses, I guess, or maybe we're the crazy spouses.
Or you can get the line, and I'm sure some retro collectors have got this. If you have to put it in storage and you're not using it, then you don't need it.
Well, and that's a pretty good argument, perhaps, but there's lots of stuff I don't need. So need is kind of a relative term, I guess, but I don't know. I can't be doing this podcast and be a big advocate for getting rid of everything that you don't absolutely need, right?
Yeah, being minimalist.
Most of us don't really need a CoCo. It just is something that makes us happy. We all need to be happy. So therefore, right, we need it.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Yeah.
Have we beat this to death, or is there more to discuss?
I think this was a good one.
Okay.
Kind of leads us into CoCo Fest, right? You never know how much stuff you're going to go home with.
Well, that's the main thing, right? You should settle where you're going to keep your stuff so that you have a plan for what to do with the stuff you buy at CoCo Fest when you get home.
And if you have to sneak it in the back door, that works too.
Yeah, or get the storage locker down the road. You can just stop there on your way home. Well, I guess that probably covers our host discussion this time. So then soon we'll be back with a technical discussion on the speech sound pack, and then later Neil's game review, and very exciting stuff. All right.
Well, good afternoon. And my name's Tony Pedraza, and I am the host of the annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. We call it the last in quotes because we really don't know if we're going to have another one. And we haven't known every year for the past 17 years.
Okay, everyone. This is John, and I'm back with this month's tech segment. I'm going to be talking about the Tandy speech sound cartridge or pack. For some reason, I always want to call it the sound speech pack. That seems to roll off the tongue a bit better for me. So if I say it in that order, please forgive me. So what is it? So the speech sound cartridge is a way of providing better audio output from your CoCo. Probably should have done this in a different order. This one actually came out before the Orchestra 90, which we talked about last month. But anyway, unlike the Orchestra 90, the speech sound cartridge actually has some rather specific hardware for generating audio without involving the CPU. So there really is some magic happening in the speech sound package. There's chips. There's a sound generator chip. There's a voice synthesis chip. There's actually a little microcontroller in there to coordinate between the other chips for access to the CPU, but also I think is there for mapping text to the allophones used in the voice synthesis. But anyway, along with the text-to-speech, which can be text-to-speech, or it can be can create the speech through the direct allophone selection in software. The sound generator can produce 3 voices of sound over an 8-octave range, and I think one of those voices can be noise as well. So, anyway, there you have it. It's a sound card on for the CoCo. It's not unlike the later Sound Blaster for the PCs and that sort of thing. A little history: the sound speech pack. The speech sound pack or cartridge first appeared in RSC-12, the Radio Shack catalog, the Radio Shack computer catalog, RSC-12. It was in 1985. It appeared on page 53 with a little new for 85 label at a price of $99. And then I think I noted in the previous month's episode, and that by the time the Orchestra 90 was released, it had dropped down to, I believe, $79, which was the same price as the Orchestra 90. But so anyway, so this is 1985. The cartridge is built around basically a complete set of chips from a company called General Instruments. Now, General Instruments was a company that was based in Pennsylvania. They had sort of made their business out of building TV game stuff. So back in the days when Pong was the king of the home computer world, there eventually came out these chips that were, Pong on a chip, or variations of Pong on a chip, and the premier, or one of the premier suppliers of these was General Instruments. Anyway, at some point they moved on to other gaming stuff, I guess, or at least some other game-related stuff, in having audio chips available. And so they moved on to programmable sound generator, and they also have speech synthesis chips, and eventually, they actually produced chips for the Intellivision, and including, I guess, I'm not sure, I think they actually produced the CPU for the Intellivision. The CP1600. They actually produced a whole chipset for the Intellivision, but one of the things they eventually produced as part of that was what some people say stood for Peripheral Interrupt Controller, or Programmable Interrupt Controller, or PIC, or the PIC. And the PIC was a microcontroller that actually has survived the company and continues to this day as a microcontroller for used in a variety of electronics projects, professional and hobbyist. And an early PIC actually found its way on the sound or speech sound cartridge as well. So very exciting stuff. For what it's worth, the programmable sound generator that is in the speech sound cartridge, the AY3 8913, is a variation of the 8910. That chip actually was going to appear in a standalone configuration, or at least not really standalone. It was going to be on the motherboard of the Deluxe CoCo, but accessed directly from the 6809 rather than going through the arbitration of a microcontroller. That would have been nice to have, but alas, it did not come to pass in any meaningful form. Okay, moving on to usage. So there's not any built-in software for, at least no CoCo software, on the speech sound cartridge. The ROM software that's there is just for the microcontroller. In fact, I don't think you'll even find a ROM on there. Yeah, looking at the schematic, there's no ROM there at all. There's a RAM, the sound generator, the PIC microcontroller, the voice synthesizer chips, and some miscellaneous other chips, but no ROM at all. There are a number of CoCo games that did come out eventually to support the synthesizer. A lot of them were Steve Bjork games, Ghana Buana, Pitfall 2, variety of other games, Gold Runner 2. Interbank Incident apparently supports it, Pegasus and the Phantom Riders, F-16 Assault, Gauntlet. There's a variety of others. There's listed out at Cocopedia. I've got a link in the show notes so you can go and check it out if you like. There are examples provided with the manual written in BASIC of how to program the audio generation capabilities of the board. You can probably find those already on diskette images out in the community. And I think there were plenty of examples printed in a variety of Rainbow magazines and such, but I'm not going to cite any of those specifically because, I'm lazy. But yeah, outside of the CoCo, these chips were used in a variety of applications, not in this configuration or whatever, but the programmable sound generator, at least in the 8910 form, was used in a variety of arcade games and in the television and the Vectrex game consoles, and Some version of the Spectrum had it, the ZX Spectrum, and the Mockingbird cars for the Apple II. There were some Yamaha chips that were essentially the same chips. One of those found its way into the Atari ST. So that's used quite a bit. The voice synthesizer chip is used. Let's see. Well, it was used in a variety of add-ons. One's called the Cura Microspeech, from which I guess was used across a number of other platforms. There was the IntelliVoice add-on for the Intellivision, used a variation on the Magnavox Odyssey. Radio Shack actually sold these chips separately for experimenters too, in a couple of variations. The voice synthesizer chip, the SP0256, had the different variations had different allophones, allophones are basically components of speech, the raw sounds or whatever. So the different variations had different allophones, so you couldn't necessarily just swap SPO256 chips one to another. You had to have the right allophone version, or else you'd get the wrong sounds produced. Anyway, let's move on from here. So the hardware is basically the AY3-8913 programmable sound generator. That chip produced 3 voices with an 8-octave range. It's programmed through a series of 16 8-bit registers. Some versions of the chip provided for a couple of general I/O ports that could be used for implementing, say, common use would be for joystick inputs or something like that. But the variation used in the speech sound pack, the 8913, does not have those ports, and so it's also has the advantage of being in a 24-pin package as opposed to a 28-pin package. So it's a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to fit on a board. The audio is pretty standard for the day. I'm sure the SID folks will tell us how much superior the SID is to this, but I'd say this is at least kind of a close second in terms of common chips from the day. We can all just argue about how close later, I guess, but I'm not sure what else to say about it. It's a pretty common sound generator chip. Basically it was a sort of a set it up to play a tone and it'll play that tone. It's sort of a fire and forget, and it'll just play that tone forever. So what you want to do, of course, is come back periodically and change the tone to whenever the notes are supposed to change. In a normal use of the chip, that's just a matter of updating the registers directly. We'll get to it in a minute, that you have to do something a little bit different on the speech sound cartridge. There's the sound generator chip, there's the SPO256 voice synthesizer chip, neither one of which are directly addressable from the CoCo, the way the hardware is designed, looking at the schematic here. So if you look, I think I mentioned in the earlier episode on the Orchestra 90 how common this address decoding with a 74LS133 and a 74LS138 is. So here it is right on this schematic as well. They're using exactly those two chips. Mix and match some of the lower address lines to get the exact address that you want. But mainly you're decoding to the PIC, which is the microcontroller. And then the PIC has, 4 ports on it, 4 8-bit ports that it then uses as a combination of address and data buses and signaling to then interface to the sound generator and the voice synthesizer. There's also an attached 2K RAM, an SRAM, that is used for some buffering. And then there's one of the ports is used to interface to the data bus for communicating to the 6809. The audio outputs of the two chips, the voice synthesizer and the sound generator, They're fed through a series of op amps. All three outputs, all three voices on the sound generator are tied together and then mixed as well with the voice synthesizer output, and then they feed back in through the sound pin on the CoCo connector, the CoCo cartridge bus connector. That's pretty much all there is to say. The schematic is kind of complicated. I mean, it's not that complicated, but there's a lot of stuff on it. But, it's basically an interface to the microcontroller, and then the microcontroller then talks to the rest of the hardware. And then, like I said, there's an audio amplification stage with a series of op amps that mixes and feeds back in through the sound pin on the cartridge port. Yeah, so one other interesting thing, the clock is actually, there's a clock doubling circuit that on board that takes the normal E clock, actually it's the combination of the E and the Q clock that are used to double, so that the microcontroller runs at the what would normally be called the high speed for the 6809, the 1.79 or 1.78 megahertz. The single speed, the 0.89 megahertz, is actually fed into a circuit that is used to generate the -6 volts, which is fed into the amplification stage so that you can have negative voltages on the audio output. And so apparently the problem is then if you actually use the high-speed poke on the CoCo, it's okay on the internal. It's just everything runs, the sounds all get higher, or would just all get higher, except that this little piece that's supposed to generate the -6 volts doesn't actually work. And so then you don't get the audio output like you're supposed to. So there's a number of variations, but there's ways to hack the hardware that are documented on CoCopedia or whatever. So if you want to be able to use your CoCo at the 1.78 megahertz and use your sound speech pack, A, will have it work, and then B, have it not sound funny. Then there's some hardware hacking you'll have to do, and I'll have the links for that in the show notes as well. Okay, well, that's probably enough about the hardware. From a software perspective, what do you have to do to program this thing? So if you get a copy of the manual, which is available, there are PDFs available online. Of course, having a nice manual in hand is always my preferred choice. But anyway, the manual, whether or not it's written well, probably depends on what you're expecting. It's not a real friendly walkthrough, like, say, the getting started with Color Basic or whatever. It's almost more like a reference manual. It's got a lot of tables with bit definitions and that sort of thing. So if you are the kind of person that likes to read off a data sheet or something like that, it's closer to that. It's not quite as detailed as a data sheet or a stack of data sheets in this case. It's a little more digested from that, but not a whole lot. There are some good examples in BASIC if you want to read through them. But like I said, a lot of the manual is bit definitions and command numbers listed, that sort of thing. So the basic notion is, if you want to program the audio generation, whether it's the voice synthesis or the sound generation, you have to go through the pick. And so you basically have to start by polling the device to see if the pick is ready to listen to you. And then if the pick is ready, then you can send a series of commands, basically to fill a buffer and then execute a buffer, or in some cases I think you can just write strings out for this text to speech to work. Even that's probably filling a buffer would be my guess, but basically if you write a value with a high bit set, it's considered a command. Of course, you can also write a zeros, which basically is a command too. So, but other than 0, all the other commands have the bit set. 0 says to stop making any sounds. There are 8 64-byte buffers defined that you can then use for a combination of things. You can load speech strings. You can load sound description data. You can load allophone addresses, so that's if you're doing a direct manipulation of the allophones rather than using text-to-speech. So you can then, using that, you can make the CoCo approximate foreign languages, for example, or, Klingon or whatever you want. Anyway, so there's strings, sound data, allophone addresses, or the sound generator register values. So I mentioned before, normally most players that hit this kind of sound generator hardware do so by dumping registers at register writes at a certain rate. In this case, the registers aren't mapped in directly to the CoCo's memory map, but there is a way to load the register values for the microcontroller to then dump them out. So it's probably, in many cases, probably just as good. There are probably some cases where that becomes a problem. I know Simon Jonason has expressed a lot of frustration over having to deal with that. Yeah, so if you load regular text, the microcontroller can convert the text. It has a set of rules for converting text into into a set of allophones. Some of it will be better than others, but it's kind of an easy way to get some speech out. If you need better control of that, you can actually send specific allophones in the order you want. Like I said, you can do some sound description stuff, which describes in the manual how you describe it. The sound description looks similar to the kinds of things you would write into the registers, but they're kind of condensed a little bit. So you don't... Maybe it makes more sense. I'm not sure. Anyway, you might like using that if you need to generate the sounds. And of course, if you just want to generate the sounds using the register settings for the chip, you can do that. Okay, well, that's about all I've got to say about the the speech sound cartridge. It's a pretty cool set of hardware. It seemed like it must have been a fairly expensive device to build. It would be my guess with all that extra hardware. Probably, it's kind of funny that it ended up costing the same as the Orchestra 90. So Orchestra 90 practically had no hardware at all. But it's like I say, in some ways, the hardware is more similar to what you would have found on, say, the Atari or the Commodore, a sound generator, rather than something that needs constant CPU service. So that's kind of cool. I'm not sure why they bundled the sound generation with the speech synthesis. I remember back in the day, it seemed like speech synthesis was just a really cool thing that people got excited about. I always was a little turned off by it. You get excited, it's going to talk to me, and then it has that robotic voice that everyone associates with computers from the 80s. But I don't know. It excited a lot of people, I guess, back then. So maybe somebody thought it made sense. I've also heard that, and I couldn't find the reference, but I remember reading somewhere that General Instruments basically made the chipset available in a kind of at a discount price for the entire set. So maybe it was just too attractive a deal to pass up, and they just put it all on the one board. Anyway, so one more thing to mention is Tim Lindner is a long-term member of the CoCo community. He several years ago, I guess, took an interest in the sound speech pack or speech sound cartridge. He set up a page that he maintains with a lot of information about it. It's got references to the manuals, and he's got some descriptions of how the microcontroller works. Data sheets for all the parts, including the microcontroller, I think. One time, which I don't see it immediately right here. Maybe it's still out there and I'm just not looking at it. Oh yeah, there it is. At one time, Tim made an effort to disassemble the ROM code for the microcontroller. And he actually has both the binary, which he managed to extract from the microcontroller, and then the disassembled code with says comments as well. So if you really want to understand how the microcontroller works, you can take a look. If you really wanted to understand it or whatever, I don't know if you could rebuild that binary for a current PIC or not. I would bet that if you understood how the code worked, you could write something pretty similar for an AVR or something like that. So if you wanted to build a clone of the speech sound cartridge, the information is there. I think it could be done. I don't know if it's worthwhile or if we should all just move on, but at least if you clone the hardware, there's software out there that already will use it. So that's always a benefit of cloning something that already existed. But anyway, I'll put a link in the show notes for Tim's webpage on the speech sound package. That's about it. So I hope you've enjoyed this overview of the Tandy speech sound cartridge. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to contact me. It's john@cococrew.org or feedback@cococrew.org. Let me know what I messed up or, what I'm left out. And if you have a testimonial, you want to talk about how great the cartridge is or how perfectly it was designed or whatever, I'd be happy to hear that as well. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll move on with the rest of the show. All right, thanks, CoCo Forever.
Now, if there is any dedicated group of old computer users, it is certainly the people who still love their CoCo, the Tandy Color computer.
Welcome back to episode 11 of the Games Corner. On this episode, I will be reviewing a game called Moon Shuttle. Do I know anything about this game? Not really. Did I play this game back in the day? Never. Why am I reviewing this game, you ask? Well, because it is a CoCo Fest memory for me. And what better episode to mention it on? The last one right before the fest. Here's the story. 2 years ago at CoCo Fest 2014, John Linville, Boise Pete, Jim O'Keefe, and myself finished dinner early and decided to head back to the conference center. We were the only ones there as everyone else was at a different restaurant and still having dinner. Jim wanted us to test some CoCos he had in his collection. On a side note, speaking of Jim, he is one super cool guy. He attended the first CoCo Fest I did back in 2010. He drives a few retro caddies. One of them has the front passenger seat removed and is always filled with CoCo goodness, from disc controllers to program reference manuals. I will never forget the first time he offered a ride and I sat in the back seat, sandwiched between CoCo hardware wall to wall. He can also sing and recently won an award on local television. But seriously, anyone who drives these awesome retro caddies with CoCo hardware in them definitely must be cool. Okay, on with the story. So we were going through each of Jim's CoCos to make sure they fire up. Boise was a pro at getting the ones working that did not boot up right away. Then all of a sudden, John notices a cassette game in Jim's CoCo stash called Moon Shuttle. So for the heck of it, we actually hooked up a tape drive and loaded up the game. Well, wouldn't you know it, this game only requiring 16K of memory was actually fun. A game I had never played or seen before. It must have snuck by me back in the day. I remember after playing the game, John begged Jim to have it in his collection. A smart move if you ask me. Definitely a gem to own in a collection. It was even complete with the manual and packaging. Well, if you enjoyed this story, this should give you another reason to make it out to CoCo Fest. This kind of thing happens there all the time. You can meet new people, make new friends, and best of all, we all have the same thing in common, the CoCo. It is this 30-plus-year-old computer that is bringing all of us together. Well, I suppose I should actually do a real review of the game Moon Shuttle, as I know all of you are probably real curious. Moon Shuttle is programmed by two guys named Jerry Humphrey and James Garon. It was released in 1983 and published by Datasoft. It requires a whopping 16K of memory and is fully compatible with all three of the CoCos. Moon Shuttle is a shooter arcade-style game. You play on two different screens. The first screen you fly through an asteroid belt, which has rows of asteroids flying by in different directions and speeds. You shoot them and also accelerate or deaccelerate your ship. The second screen, you must shoot a certain number of enemy spaceships which can dodge and shoot back at you. As you go through this level again and again, you get different enemy spaceships to combat, which get smarter and harder to kill the higher levels you get in the game. This game really is good. It runs at a great clip and amazed me at how detailed it was for a game requiring such a low amount of memory. A great excuse, if you ask me, to use your old CoCo 1 or 2 that has not been upgraded to 64K yet. This game definitely deserves some love. If you're interested in trying it out, it can be downloaded from the Color Computer Archives website. I will make sure to add the link in the show notes. Thank you all for listening. Long live the CoCo, and game on.
After these messages,
We'll be right back.
Well, wouldn't you know it, it's that time again. We have reached the end of episode 11, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time to pack up and get ready for CoCo Fest. Seriously, crunch time now. I must go hit the soldering iron and finish up the Sega Joypad adapters that I'm getting ready for the fest. I'd like to thank our host John Linville for providing yet another excellent tech segment, this time on the Speech Sound Pack. I think he sounded the smoothest on this one, don't you agree? Very laid back and relaxed sounding. We'd also like to thank all of you for listening and sending in your feedback. Hope to see you all at CoCo Fest. We can blow the doors off the place. Stay tuned for episode 12, the full report on CoCo Fest. Until next month, happy cocoing and CoCo forever.